hallway.
Perfect. And any agenda changes? Okay, we'll keep the agenda as is, open to the public for items not related to the agenda. Anyone online having anything? We're not monitoring the chat, so if you want to say something, you have to turn your camera on and wave at us. Okay, we'll move on. Announcements and staff report. Anyone have any announcements?
Who lives down in southern part of the state, has a company that's now called WheelPad, and some of you may have seen these. They make accessible, it's like an accessible unit, trailer size unit, that's very small units, and a module that can be added to a home to create an accessible bedroom, usually for an adult senior, parent or something like that, so that they can live with their family instead of having to go to senior housing. And he was so excited. He says, we have a factory now, we're building these. We have, we have orders. And I said, have you had any difficulty in getting these approved in different towns and cities? And have you put any in South Burlington? He said, well, as a matter of fact, we had a terrible time getting them approved in South Burlington. I said, what was the problem? He's like, NIMBY. For some reason, the neighbor just thought, oh, this is, and they're actually incredibly attractive units. So it surprised me, and I wondered whether some of the changes that we've been making, allowing administrative approval of things, if that's been changed partly as a result of this, because he had to come up to DRB meetings twice for one of them. And he said it was just terrible to have to charge his client that much money because he comes from Wilmington. That's not close. And that, I said, well, what can we do? And he's like, there should be a way to kind of make it more just an administrative thing to add, well, sort of like, it's similar to an ADU, but these are quite small. And he didn't really understand why a neighbor should be allowed to, keep someone from putting one of these on their house. Because it, they were designed to be very attractive. I'll pass this around. And he also sent me to an article, which wasn't exactly this article, so I apologize for the title. But it's definitely worth a read, and I did. Did you send it? I didn't send it to everybody. I think I sent it to Kelsey and.
Yeah, I did see it.
Paul.
I didn't realize not everyone was on the list.
Yeah,
So
not
you can
everybody was on the
forward it.
list, so if you could send that out, it's definitely worth a read. It's basically about, some parts of the country are, and it seems like it's the liberal parts of the country have made it very, very difficult to do things. And it doesn't just mean for construction. It's like putting in solar panels, wind turbines, a lot of energy infrastructure, EV charging stations, basically everything that you want to be doing, but we've created rules that have made it very difficult. And a lot of it, is that we allow everybody to comment. It's like, everybody has an opinion. It's like, oh, we don't want that there. It's gonna be dangerous. It's gonna be, fill in the blank. And, I think we really need to be thinking about that and I think one of the things I appreciated is that we have been making changes to the LDRs that allow for administrative approvals. And certainly Act 250 is kind of going that direction to, allow in certain areas for more housing to be built, without, it requires a lot more involvement, not just, oh, I don't like that. And the part of an abutter or a neighboring property to be able to, stop a project, and certainly there's a lot of that has happened in South Burlington where, one fairly shisty lawyer gets involved and next thing you know, there's 36 houses that aren't gonna be built. So I think we just want to do as much as we can to kind of really think, it's like, how do we make this more fair?
Yeah, and I think, if we are seeing a lot of issues with the accessory dwelling units or small addition, it's part of our housing goal to be having additional units
Right.
and smart infill, so.
Yeah.
And I mean, especially this kind of a thing. I mean, I felt incredibly lucky to be in a home where I already could use a wheelchair and crutches, like. Never thought I'd need it multiple times this age,
I
but
know. But you've ended that, right? No more?
No, I just crutches now, so yeah.
I never
hopefully-
get rid of my crutches.
Yeah.
I've used them.
Well, I'm keeping the walker now, I guess, too. So, well, thank you. We'll make sure that article gets sent around.
I just emailed it out.
Oh, good. Anyone else have any announcements? Any other staff announcements?
So did anybody participate in the the committee economic forum?
All three of us, yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Do you want to say anything about that before I?
Well, I thought it was excellent. I think I particularly liked the design of how they are going about getting information and the framework for questioning. I thought it was very inclusive, and you can still use that word, right? Inclusive. I feel like the outcome will be good. I mean, they don't have all the answers. They had some really fascinating data. Like South Burlington is getting younger. We're one of the younger communities.
Amongst a
Yeah.
group of 10 peers,
Yeah,
cities.
So some interesting data like that, but I like the way they presented it, and it sounded as if there's lots more steps to come. And, I'm optimistic that what they come back with will be very helpful.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because at the end I made a comment because I said, well, I think we're getting younger because, I mean, certainly I look in my neighborhood and my neighborhood has gotten much younger, but it's one of the more affordable neighborhoods. And, and I think that's an indicator too. But yeah, if you go to certain parts of town, you'll see mostly young people.
But the statistics we've heard forever has been that we're an aging state and an older community and blah, blah, blah.
All our friends are older, right?
Well, all mine are, my close friends.
Hi, this is Paul. I didn't attend the meeting, but I sent something to Jessie Baker that she said that she would share with Alana. And it was a criticism of the report, the study, that I thought that it was, it is based upon things are going great, things will go great forever. Will continue to grow, will continue to boom. The economy will always be good. So, that was my 2 cents was, I think that we should look at what might happen if the future isn't as great as we think it's going to be, which it seems to be looking that way right now.
Well, their data was collected before last Wednesday.
Right, exactly. Exactly, yeah.
Well, I think it also probably has something to do with whether you've worked for, you know, who you've worked through it for in your life. If you work for private industry, you know, I think you probably are more taking a wait and see attitude. If you've worked in government or in nonprofits, you probably think it's the end of the world. You know, it's like, I've never worked for a government entity, and I'm like, and I think about all the places I've lived where we have had a lot less government than here. And we managed to get by just fine. I managed to graduate from high school and go to a very good college, even though like our schools were nowhere, anywhere like the ones that South Burlington has.
That really wasn't my issue. My issue is that there are downturns and all kinds of things happening with the economy all the time. You know, there are recessions, there are depressions, there are all kinds of things that happen. So to just plan for a future of nothing but up, up, up and go, go, go is just not realistic. I mean, you know, the market will correct. You know, there'll be downturns, there'll be all kinds of things that happen. So I thought it was important for them to include that in the report, and there isn't any inclusion of it in the report.
Well, I don't think that was the full report. That was their first set of slides. And I also, Paul, I'm just gonna push back a little bit. I don't think the company was coming forward with, we think that there should be an incredible amount of economic development in the city of South Burlington. They were laying out the things that could make that happen and be attractive, kind of the strengths and the weaknesses. And then it's up to this city to embrace an economic development plan. And I would like to think that we would include, Paul, the understanding that it isn't always going up, 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 big, 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 that there's those dips and valleys and you have to kind of manage them as well. But that was just my takeaway.
No, I think it was very well done, but I think the focus, the outset was on workforce development, housing, and attracting technology companies. And there wasn't a balance about the things that they call quality of life, which is our climate action plan, conservation, which truly affect our quality of life. And I think they'll pick up on that. And I don't think anybody they spoke to represented that sort of side of South Burlington's view. I think the next ones will.
So it seems
They have
like maybe a
round tables.
good interim step to have had this meeting.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I got the impression that the consultant was from Texas.
She is.
She is, yeah.
Yeah, from Austin. Yeah, she said that. And the other thing, I think when people ask questions around here about, do you bicycle? You know, it's always like one of those, you know, do you bike to work? Do you bike to do things?
Depends on the weather.
Exactly. It's just like, they don't leave it open for you to say, well, I bike when the weather allows.
Yeah.
You know, it's either a yes or a no. And so it's always like, you're always trying to figure out, well, what do you say? So I think somehow some of the biking may get underrepresented because, you know,
Right.
most people can't do it year round.
She, the lead consultant has a really interesting professional background. Prior to doing what she's doing now, she had she'd run the Chamber of Commerce for Austin. She'd been the deputy city manager for the city of Austin, and she was head of Texas Nature Conservancy. So she's sort of got
Is she
the
an
whole,
economist by training?
I don't know that for, but she's certainly, to your point, Michael, she's
Very
seen many sides of this this equation, and that's part of what was really attractive about bringing
Brings a
their
lot.
team in.
Hmm.
I just had one. Oh, go ahead, Duncan.
Yeah, I just wanted to give some feedback. I actually did speak to the consultant. They interviewed me for their, all their knowledge, not my knowledge. I think that the plan is kind of a recognition that the economy is a big pillar of the city, and looking at it, what are the pitfalls? What are the opportunities? And what can we do to avoid the pitfalls and hopefully take advantage of the opportunities? I don't necessarily think it was, as Paul said, all go, 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 but what are the major things facing, what are the major problems facing some of our bigger employers or the economy in the city? And what can we do to help? And not exclusive of the environment or the conservation, but holistically. I think it's great that the city's doing this. So
We haven't had, I mean, this group hasn't had a lot of focus on it. We've had a lot of other focuses, so it is.
Yeah.
It's something I felt like we haven't really dove into, so it's great. Other announcements?
Just one brief announcement. You're gonna see that there is in the bottom left-hand square of the Hollywood Squares up there is Town Meeting TV. So we have been recording our meetings for a long time and posting them to YouTube. The council worked with our city manager to come to an agreement with Town Meeting TV, where they will be in the background of all of our meetings and performing the same level of service of providing indexed recordings for the future. So it's gonna be really nice that now DRB, Council, Planning Commission will all be to the public viewing the same way, kept in the same place, and like I said, indexed by agenda item. So just welcome to the folks from Town Meeting TV.
That's great news.
Yahoo.
Thank you. So we better keep it civil here.
That's right.
Don't need our bickering on TV. Okay, so let's see, moving on to our form-based code heights visualizations. This is something we've been looking forward to for a while. And we had some in our packet, and I'm going to start there. Or Kelsey also said that there were a few revisions from the consultant as well. So we might see some new images as well here during this discussion.
Yep, so the version that you have in, that was provided to you in the supplemental packet, they are scaled to the maximum height that we provided to them. The feedback that we got from them as commercial architects is that our maximum height and our maximum stories didn't actually match up. So what you saw in what was provided to you is a maximum of about 12 stories with roof and then rooftop structures above that, pitched roofs, things like that. We've also asked them to write up the maximum 14 stories, and Paul has access to those to share so that you can, because we gave them two numbers that in their opinion didn't match. So we're gonna show you two things. One is a maximum feet that actually works out to about 12 stories. The core of which is that we estimated that an upper story, a residential story, would require 10 feet. And they said to get an 8-foot 6-inch ceiling, you'd actually need closer to 11 feet because of the way that the structure needs to be done and the ducting and systems and other things as you go higher. So 14 feet or 14 stories, as we proposed, would require a higher maximum feet than we had proposed.
So in effect, what that does is you asked us to show a range of what would it look like at 10 stories, what would it look at 12 stories, so
Yep.
this is those two ranges, just the heights are.
Yep. And then there's some different views, as you can see in what was given to you. Some that are focused more on the San Remo Drive area. That's the area we chose as indicative of what you could do in the T4. And then other views kind of point the other way and are more focused on the T5, which is more the Dorset and Market Street area. A good number of buildings that exist remained, things that we anticipate sticking around for a while, like the Trader Joe's building, Healthy Living, things like that. They are not sort of in the timeline to be replaced anytime soon. So some of those remain, and then they strategically located a few buildings on, specifically on structures or lots that we anticipate are pretty ripe for redevelopment, like that sort of half-used parking structure by the DMV building, kind of behind Barnes and Noble. Things like that are pretty ripe for putting new buildings on. A couple of things to note, we didn't have them build out every building to the maximum height. We don't think that's realistic, and neither do they. Not every building is going to be built to the max. So there is some variation within it. There's also some variation on rooftop structures and roof lines. How the podium, sort of a commercial podium, is designed, and then a residential area above it. Sometimes it's more of a tower, sometimes it's more continued. A few of them split into, at least one splits into two towers. So we asked them for some variation in that. It also reflects the proposed requiring a step back of about 10 to 12 feet between the third and eighth story at some point. So that's reflected in the visualizations as well. And then in one or two places, they did put a frontage civic space. So having the building kind of be an L shape or a U shape with a well-designed plaza kind of space intended to be in the middle, actually fronting on the street.
Bring it up,
There it is. Do you have it?
right? Are we gonna?
It's up to
look
you.
through?
I mean, whatever you'd like to do with it. So we did this, so you asked for some visualizations. The last thing I'd add is that in this draft of it, we were trying to find sort of the sweet spot between the very amateur 1 hour, couple hour job that I had done and something that would take a very long time for the designers to do. They were not tasked with all of the different building breaks and building tops and window standards and things like that. They did shade out levels so you can get stories. And in a few buildings, they kind of added a little bit of like generic windows just so that it feels like a building. But I'm happy to bring up either the PDFs, we also have it as a Google Earth file. In either the version that you saw or the slightly higher one. So you tell us where you wanna start.
Okay,
The
cool.
one that came with your amended
Yep.
is the one that's got the labels on it.
Yes.
Okay.
So the PDF that has labels on it, that's the only thing that you have.
Good.
The sort of ones with additional height haven't been circulated. Paul has those.
Right, so there's another version that also has labels that's 2 more stories in height.
Hmm.
So you have not seen that one. I have it on my computer. We just got it at about 3 o'clock today, so.
Yep.
So tell us where you'd like to start. Or you don't have to say it at
I
all.
could
It's up
just
to you.
say it's been generally helpful.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any like specific things they wanna look at together or comment on, or we could look at the slightly higher version?
I'm curious to see the higher version.
Yeah, maybe that makes sense to pull up. It's new.
Didn't we say we would limit the basic to 10 to 12 depending on it's 10 if there's no affordable housing bonus, and it's 12 with rather than 14 going to 16?
That was the discussion about the T4.
Only T4.
How do we finalize what we're?
Well, I
doing?
would say-
I guess
it
there was a lot of
there was
discussion of different
open-ended.
possibilities, and I think
Yeah.
this is in the realm.
Yeah.
All of these, I guess is what I'd say, is that plus or minus a story or two is sort of in the realm. So not to, so this is the plus version. So this is the same thing you saw, but with 2 stories added. So this is the
So that's Barnes and Noble and that's.
this is looking south on Dorset Street here. This is the Anchorage Inn.
This is the building I was talking about being on the parking garage, the 2-story parking garage that's across from the DOD that's here. Market Street's there.
So that's not gonna be a future parking garage?
Well, it's just an option. It's just something as part of the visualization about.
No,
I wondered
14-story one.
So it's the old,
The small footprint for
The old-
14-story.
am I seeing the old kind of, they bumped up like some of the buildings, but not all. of them,
Right.
is that-
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So we asked them to show a number of buildings that are hitting the maximum, but don't assume that everything is,
Yeah.
because that's sort of showing a non-realistic outcome.
One comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was in Montreal over the weekend, so I was really looking at buildings a lot, while we were walking around and, and what struck me, cause I reviewed all this before I went. I kind of had that in my brain about the podium heights and stuff like that. And one of the things that is really kind of delightful about being in a real city is how different all the buildings are. And it's that it's the fact that they're all so different and, you know, I have photographs that show all these different heights and everything and how it all works. It all works because they're all different. And, you know, it just, so this whole podium height thing, although I think it's a very good idea and many buildings had them. The fact that the buildings were different materials, particularly above the podium height. And that's one of the things that I think maybe we want to talk about because, you know, the fact that we've kind of controlled the materials and everything like that, that maybe that's not so important when you get above the podium level. That, you know, because there's certainly a lot of buildings that have curtain wall systems and it makes a lot of sense for the higher levels, just because you've got a lot of wind loading up there, you got a lot of things happening. And also I wondered if these buildings were intended to have the depth of residential buildings, because used to be that office buildings had bigger footprints and bigger footplate, you know, larger floor area.
I
And
think
it's-
in many cases, Donna, not across the board, but they, for the taller buildings, in several cases, they did lean towards the residential, seeing that that's a more likely outcome, at least for the near future.
Yeah.
So you'll see that in some of the buildings.
Mhm.
Something that's probably not that reflected in here, but it's the second time we've heard it from professional architects, is that mass timber construction is becoming more and more attractive, which would not require the podiums. It's a very different structure that hasn't been done here, but we've heard it now twice in 6 months from folks saying it's,
They'd like to be able to do it, you know, they'd like
Well,
to,
the
they'd like
airport's
to
gonna
it
do the mass timber in one of their new,
Okay.
well, I mean, who knows where federal grants are now, but,
Generally with tall buildings
Anyway.
which are curtain wall structure, they do have the setback on the, because the ground floor is
Right,
not part of the curtain wall.
right.
Well,
Typically,
I guess one thing, I mean, we're talking about the setbacks, I mean, to me, it still feels like the setbacks are a good idea, like, we wanna keep that part
It
in
looked
there.
like
that
there
there's
was, like there
some-
was one place, and I think it was right on the edge of Market Street, right next to the old Blue Mall. But there was a building shown in one of the elevations that looked like it didn't have a podium, or maybe it did and it just didn't show up
when you
in
say
that view.
podium, is that what you mean,
The
like
bottom-
the bottom
bottom
part, and then there's
The
a
larger,
setback?
yeah, the larger
Okay,
bottom.
just
bottom
so I
portion.
understand.
Yeah, cause we had been talking about it as a setback.
Yeah, so
At
the
some
podium
point,
were,
the
They're like the
building
brown one in the middle
Yeah.
there, it's
right,
just like,
yeah, I
okay,
got it, I understand that
that's
now.
very clearly a
thought you
podium.
Yeah. I mean, I one compromise I think I mentioned last time is I like the idea of, I mean, we discussed a little bit of making, if we're gonna have like a step back requirement, make the threshold pretty high. So it would really only be required in like the tallest of buildings. Like potentially say, I mean, one number, say like 8 stories. So if you build an 8-story building, you don't need podium. If you want a 10-story building, then you need some kind of podium or step back or something. It's one.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Maybe.
we agreed on 8 though, I
Yeah.
thought we were talking about maybe like 3 or 4, and then.
But Donna's almost saying none at all. Like it's that sort of.
No,
That's not what
I
I'm saying.
I
definitely
think we
want
put a
to.
range.
No, that's not what I'm saying, I
in
mean,
the
did.
draft.
We do 3 to 8 or something?
that was the guidance
Yeah,
given
it's
to
a
the
real
architects
pretty-
here, and they felt like that was fairly realistic because it's, you know, the one style of construction and then another one on top of it, that's at least currently a fairly common trend to do that.
And quite often podium is one, high ceilings, because of the banks and things like that, they generally go 2 stories, use up 2 stories in one space.
Or a big retail, you know, like LL Bean, they're really tall.
but then some of the and it also had a lot to do more with the massing of the buildings too, because in South Burlington, they're more or less strung along a linear corridor. And, you know, they're all kind of abutting either residential areas or a street, like Dorset Street. The setbacks really make sense in that situation, whereas if you have a lot of buildings clustered together in a downtown area, the setbacks aren't always quite as
So,
important.
One thing just to point out on that point, we intentionally did not ask the architects to sort of map out example massing buildings on like the U-Mall property or north of Williston Road. So this visualization is very linear because it was sort of the San Remo T4 and then the Market and Dorset T5.
Well, they
But
are,
there's this whole depth of the U-Mall
yeah.
that we would anticipate being further developed in some way in the next decade or so. But that hasn't been shown as part of the massing study.
Oh, okay, I misread that, cause I thought that those the
Yeah.
white and gray buildings, I thought that was on the U-Mall property, but it's.
Part of you.
This,
Technically on the U-Mall property, but
this
it is
is
not.
U-Mall property, well,
It's not
with
on
the
the,
exception of the dentist's office that is no parcel currently. It is the U-Mall, but we were not, as a massing study, we were trying to be careful not to say, this is the plan for the U-Mall, because this is a massing study of possibilities, and we thought
Okay.
having some groupings would give a sense of the streetscape without,
Very helpful,
Yeah, I
really, great.
mean, I look at
It
that and I
look
think,
really weird if there's like only 2 really tall buildings that ever get built.
at first.
Well, she said if ever get built, I mean,
Ever?
it's a possibility, like maybe there'd just be a handful.
Yeah.
You think?
I don't
I
know.
mean, I don't know. They're pretty expensive to build and
Well, economic development and all.
this is a very specific example, but I can say where I went to college, our sciences library was 14 stories because of the PH. 14, and everything else was sort of historic and a little bit of new, but nothing was higher than I think 4 or potentially 5 stories. And just the way that it was all laid out, it was obvious that it was taller, but 14 stories is not 20. I think it's not as jarring as something higher would
it's not
definitely
like a New York skyscraper.
Correct.
It also seems to me if there's the economic conditions to make sense for someone to build one 14-story building, there's probably the economic conditions for make sense to build another and another, you know what I mean?
If the first one
or a
worked,
9.
Yeah.
Or a 9.
Sure, sure.
Or something else.
Well, I think it's gonna take a long time, get that many tall buildings built in South Burlington.
Agreed.
I mean, just in terms of
oh yeah.
jobs and people and.
It's long term.
Well, even 14 feels a lot, cause we stayed in a 3-story old, little hotel
Mhm.
on Sherbrooke, and right across the street literally were 20-story buildings. And that felt a little jarring, but they've been there for a while. And the little hotels still exist, and it's right across the street, Champlain College has their building right there too, and that's a 4-story building. So, I mean, they seem to work next to each other reasonably well.
I agree.
It's very obvious that Paul was guided by Ilana's dreams.
How so?
That's her dream of a city center.
Well,
I think-
No, this is
Dream of
just, this
14
is just a
story.
kind of a maximum build out.
I'm joking.
Maybe.
Yeah, I don't think it's anything to do with a person.
Anyway, I,
Paul or Duncan, wave or speak up if you have anything you want to add. Or I'll just keep an eye.
all right,
Does anyone want to see anything different? Or, I mean, I feel like this is very helpful for when we get to like public presentations.
Right.
I'm interested to get feedback from the public on kind of that range of upper limit,
Uh-huh,
like,
yeah.
you know. The ones I looked at the most are kind of in that 9, 10, 11 range, like the first ones we got was kind of where I was feeling like felt comfortable as an upper range, but now we have these, I wanna take a closer look at these
8,
taller
10 and
ones.
12.
Yeah.
And for the purposes of, at least for the next little while of public outreach, if you want to have both sets out there, it's only 5 slides, it's not a burden to show both up there side by side and have people taking a look at
3
it.
slides.
I think
Yeah.
that could be really helpful to kind of be able to think about the range we're contemplating and.
Has the
One,
fire marshal had any comments about
we
that?
just, Kelsey, just last week reached out to the other departments.
Mhm.
With the, to ask for meetings for them to review. I'd say preliminarily, the fire marshal noted that no big surprise, there's a lot more codes that come in for tall buildings, but that's not a surprise to anybody. And we're also sending it this week to, folks who participated in the outreach that, Nick hosted last summer. So we're gonna start to be getting a lot more feedback.
Hey, Duncan, just 1 second. So I know in the past when we set the building heights around 5 stories, it was very tied to like our fire equipment and fire response. Are they gonna be commenting
So that's gonna be
specifically
one of
on
the
that?
specific questions that we're gonna ask them is
Yeah.
what does that change in terms of equipment needs? If it does at all. It may just be that there's different code requirements for the construction of the building, because at some point you max out any truck anywhere. But that is one of our specific questions is, are there capital needs that these thresholds create?
And Duncan?
Yeah, one thing, just in terms of scaling, looking at those buildings on the back of San Remo Drive, but those are 4 stories, yes?
They are up to 5 on the San Remo side.
Yeah.
And 3 on the side facing the neighborhood, which
Okay.
is the current requirement.
Yeah, the
Okay,
way-
no, that was my question. I don't know if there's a way to show that scaling, because I think that's certainly, people are gonna have concerns about that abutting the neighborhood. It would be good if you could see, okay, here's the 8-story buildings on Dorset Street going down to the 3-story buildings that are abutting the neighborhood, because it's tough, when looking at it from the view we had, this is a much better view. Yeah, that's a much better. I don't know if you can somehow incorporate that in, because that's,
So it's
That's-
just a matter of what perspectives you wanna see, so
Yeah.
it takes them 10 seconds to make another one.
okay, no, that would be great, because that gives a much better view of what the profile would look like. Because I'm sure that's a concern a lot of people are gonna have is abutting, the neighborhoods. How high are we gonna go? What are we gonna allow? And I think that's gonna be something that's needs to be very clearly spelled out.
Yeah, not only how high, but how large a building, because I
Yeah.
think the more than the height, but certainly more than the height is just the footprint of those buildings are really, really large.
They need more green space around.
Paul Ingles?
Yeah, Paul Connor, I think it's important to have building envelopes on these buildings before you make these slides public. I discovered last time around with form-based code that I think people's expectations for what they're going to look like are greatly formed by the building envelopes more than the size and the height and that part of the building. So I'd actually be happy to do that for you, put some building envelopes on those.
So Paul, you mean like pictures and bricks?
No,
and-
just, just show what they'd actually look like built out.
Right, with windows and doors and that kind of stuff, siding.
Landscaping, the works, setbacks, everything, yeah.
The architect would love you for saying that comment.
Oh, well,
That's a lot of extra work.
I mean, I guess that's the question, there's a couple questions for you in there.
probably could do it while we're waiting here in the meeting,
This, we had a very preliminary conversation at the very beginning of this project with them about sort of the scope of work. It is magnitudes more to, they showed a couple of buildings where they just sort of put generic windows on there. It's magnitudes more to both dress up each of the buildings and then magnitudes beyond that to look to our form-based code to all of our standards within it. They were not tasked with doing that. I don't have a cost for doing that. I'd certainly be happy to do it. I will say that
I'll do it for you for free.
Do
I
you-
work a lot in AI, and it's easy to do that kind of stuff in AI. Believe me, it really is. I'll do it. I'll send it to you. You can see what you think.
I think we're very open to looking at something you produce, Paul, so.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Interesting to see.
because I agree with him. It will if the public just saw that and they lived in one of those little houses, they
Yeah.
would probably.
Yeah, I don't
um,
want that next door to me. Yeah.
It sounds
Right,
like
if they were
For sale sign.
attractive looking,
For sale
you know, they could be convinced that maybe it was okay.
Yeah,
So-
we did that with form-based code. We had the same kind of thing. We had the, you know, the building blocks kind of stuff. And, you know, they ended up building building blocks, you know, they never built, you know, the part of it that was the important part, which was the envelopes.
Well, it sounds like we have budget to get maybe a couple of other viewpoints of the same model, like this one we're showing on the screen.
Yeah,
And then we also have
I'll
budget
do a couple of them and send them out,
Yes.
take a look at them.
Yeah.
That stuff has gotten really easy to do with AI now.
the idea.
Could we consider doing something like this along with the north side of Williston,
Probably can.
which is kind of where the future might lie?
So
You
you
can
would.
add- You can
San
ask AI, you know,
Drive
tell us what the city will look like in
Walk.
2050, and it'll tell you what the city will look like in 2050. With palm trees and everything. you know.
We picked San Remo Drive. We were sort of debating, do we pick Williston Road or San Remo Drive? They're both T4s. We thought that it would be interesting to pick San Remo Drive because the lot ownership is much smaller foot plates versus U Mall that's a lot bigger. So it was sort of creating a separation. I can ask about it. I guess what I would say, what I was about to say is the company that did this, Freeman French Freeman, were very excited to do a quick project that they could slot in amongst all of their other big jobs. I think that there is a point at which they'll say, okay, but now you're actually at the back of the line. They put us at the very front of the line, knowing that you had a timeline that you wanted to hit. So I can ask them, but they might say to do more could be 3 months from now.
Don't
So-
ask them to do more. I'll send you something and you can see what you think, okay?
Oh, no, Michael was asking about adding more buildings on a different part of the city.
That's a good idea too. Williston Road, I think is important.
I can wait for that.
I'm almost the opinion to not go too crazy with this because I feel like the more, I mean, again, if whatever you wanna do, Paul, I definitely would be curious to see that, but there's a part of me that almost feels that the more effort we put into it, the more it looks like, oh, this is what it will look like. Whereas this, I see this is like, this just shows me ballpark how big are these things gonna be. I mean, this is obviously not what it's gonna look like. These are Lego blocks, you know, and I worry that if the more we build out, the more we add all the buildings everywhere, the more there's less kind of ability for someone who sees this to put their own imagination into it to sort of see, oh, well, this is roughly how it could do. Okay, I think it's very clear that this is just a showing you, this is like a possibility, this is like how big these things are gonna be, and we're not trying to actually design the build out, because of course, we can't do that.
Well, do you remember the thing that Kevin had done? The aerial
Right, that's sort
view?
of, that's that
That
the movie, yeah.
Yes, and that's what people thought it would look like.
Right.
And when it doesn't look like that.
Right,
Market
and
Street
that's,
does
and
not
that's
look
the
like
challenge,
that.
right? Cause their
And
assignment
people
was do
have-
something that the code would allow, but they were given complete editorial authority to do whatever they want.
Exactly, and it looked really cool.
Yep.
But I think the public saw that as, oh, this is what it's gonna look like?
Yeah.
It's all done? There's no,
Right, I think that's the risk that you play here of, you know, if you show the buildings, all of them, or if you show them as the best versions that they could possibly be, that doesn't necessarily mean the range that they're allowed to be.
right, and I don't think we should have every street built out. I mean, will look like Little Manhattan or something. I don't think that's what the public is thinking. We're just trying to
Or
get
you
a
could
sense
just-
of how tall, and let's have it in a couple places to get a sense.
I feel like when you think like, oh, South Burlington, it's all like 2-story buildings, those two makes it 4, you're 14, 12, oh, that's huge and scary, but when I see this, I'm like, yeah, that's big, that's not a skyscraper, like I feel like that's what this does, and I feel like that it does it well, without trying to be anything more than that, but.
Right, Duncan?
Well,
Or Paul, go ahead, and then we'll go to Duncan.
During all this, it's, a while ago, I remember in our meetings, it occurred to me that what we're actually building here is a modern city, that we're building South Burlington into a modern city. That was a different, that's a different vision than the vision we had with form-based code, which was to, replicate the 19th century buildings. But, now that I've gotten over that, looking at building South Burlington as a modern city, I actually think it's a really great idea, I think that's what we should be thinking about, and that's what we should be doing. Burlington is, slipping, and it's an old city, and we're not an old city, we're a new city. We're right on the interstate, which is, today's world, not the lake. And I really think that we could actually be the city in Vermont in the future, the modern city in Vermont, and really even replace Burlington. So, I think what we're doing is tremendous, so, and we should just keep at it, really.
Duncan?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I kind of agree with where Colin's coming from. I don't think we need to do incredible detail on the buildings themselves. I think this is just kind of a generic scaling exercise to see what do these buildings look like. I don't want to take work away from Paul, but I don't know that we necessarily need, a huge detail in each of these buildings. It's more of a generic exercise of what is the scale, where does it fit, where does it not fit, what does it look like?
Duncan, it has nothing to do with reality. It just has to do with selling the stuff, if people see building blocks, they think, I don't want building blocks next to me. But if you show them, a really nice looking building, it's like, oh, that's beautiful. And it's 14 stories tall. Wow, that's cool, So, it really is more of a public relations kind of thing than anything else. Not to diminish the importance of it, but, if you're going to start talking about 14-story buildings in South Burlington, you're going to have to sell the idea of 14-story buildings to
No, I don't disagree on that, Paul. I just think this is a very generic exercise.
Yeah, but it just makes it pretty, really, it makes it pretty, so.
So I think one thing that could be helpful also is maybe to have a few like photographs of buildings that are kind of a
That too.
similar size. Like, so someone could maybe say, oh, I actually went to Montreal and I saw that building and it's actually quite nice. Like, just maybe to complement this could be like an.
Yeah.
So, do you wanna go ahead? And then we'll get you in a minute.
Quick comment. I don't know exactly what the limits of Google Earth is. I know you can't just easily add these in Street View or anything. I would be curious if there's any possibility of getting an angle from like as low down as possible looking down Dorset Street. Like, I know we can't quite get eye level, I don't think, with this model, but I'm curious if like we could get like a rough idea of like kind of what the looking down the street is, because that's sort of like a view that people might actually see.
Down the
Low,
tunnel.
yeah.
Yeah, kind of like that, yeah, that's like, I think the lower we can get, the more I think helpful it is, but if that's the lowest we can get, I think that's still a helpful view. It's
Well, I
like,
think that gives a really good sense.
yeah,
I
no.
mean, you could
That's
sort
a
of
great
picture
idea.
that.
Okay, anything from the audience or, go ahead?
Yeah, I think the discussion I'm hearing from everyone with like the pros and cons of what level of illustration is actually pretty valuable, because there are lessons learned during the form-based code, but also if you show an existing parts of the city with purely blank boxes, it will just translate as like brutalist architecture. And so even though your intention is to show something blank, it won't register that way because the level of detail of the boxes is less than the pixels everywhere else. And so to show something like this would be good to have other texture on it. That said, where you're going, Jessica, with can we get pictures of examples that are real, that show those height differences, that aren't showing a change to our own landscape, I think that's probably the safest bet and direction to go in general, just because it avoids more of the problems overall. In terms of the height and massing, I think it's interesting because it does look like a really big building backing up onto Barrett Drive there, but right there on Dorset Street, you have a building of that size directly next to one-story, single-family homes, right? It's the Green Mountain Inn, I don't know what it's called. It's like the hotel with the pedestrian bridge.
I think that's what it's called.
Green Mountain Suites.
Suites, right? That's a full 3 stories plus all of its roofing accoutrement. And so that's,
Mhm.
you know, thinking, is that actually the maximum height that could be next to a residential neighborhood? I don't know. I think if the form is nice, then it probably could be more than 3 stories, just for consideration, but it looks different in color in real life than a gray box does.
I just sent an example of, I had to take a picture of this in Montreal. It's right near the Olympic Stadium. But they're actually 4-story units, but they do an amazing job breaking the scale down. I just sent a copy to Paul and Kelsey.
Well, that's really nice, Paul. I think that's actually really kind of what you were getting
Yeah, I
at,
like
Colin.
you, yeah.
You know, to have a couple of varying views, I think that could be really helpful.
Yeah, especially
You know,
with
the
the
scale
suites,
of
so you have a
It's about as
little.
low as we can
It
get.
looks like a 3-story building. It's actually
Yeah.
4, maybe.
Well, I'm in the interest of not getting too far behind, it'd be nice to move on to the height, how we measure height discussion, if people are ready.
They're all new,
Fine by me.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go with how we actually measure this.
relatively.
So Nick's leading this section, so shift your mental gear, we're
Yeah.
not talking about the form-based code now. This is a separate project about heights
They have
citywide,
Whole city.
So,
largely outside of city center, so shift mental, physical.
Right, exactly, so, yeah, including everything that we, including everything we've just been talking about with the periphery a little bit.
Hey,
So I can't.
all of you over there, you're gonna get separated. Nick's on.
So, so we're gonna start this discussion about how to measure building heights in the neighborhoods, outside of the city center, outside of the form-based code, by, bringing things right down to earth. So, when we started this project charge, and we're gonna work our way back up for a little bit. So when we started this project, started it out with some research and some, discussions with some folks who have interacted with, our LDRs over the years, builders, developers, designers, architects, and got a sense for where they were having issues with doing what they do, after, you know, in their interaction with the LDRs in terms of like heights and how to measure them and how to comply with the various requirements that we have that regulate heights of buildings. And so and across the spectrum, one big thing came out, which was that the sort of, no pun intended, foundational problem for most of them was how to measure grade and how to and where and how to establish grade as the starting point from which you can measure other measures of elevations, stories, overall height, relation to street, etc. And so what they, were describing were difficulties in making their designs, pretty standard designs for homes, duplexes, single family homes, duplexes, etc. Fit in with our requirement to use the pre-construction grade, which is the grade before any kind of home building has begun. And this basically leads to a situation where they're sort of reverse engineering their buildings based on the box between where the starting grade is and where the allowable height is, while also still having to consider relation to street and overall topography of the site, as well as any unique factors that might be in the design, and of course the layout, the overall layout of the site to maximize things like views, solar exposure, site the driveway properly, etc. So doing this on both, we identified some difficulties with designing around the pre-construction grade measurement in both subdivisions as well as like infill, sort of tear down, rebuild. It was a very common issue that people had to navigate. So and also talking with some of the other issues involving heights, like the number of stories facing the street, etc. It emerged that the reliance on pre-construction grade, is one of the things that drives the complex nature of table C2 with its multiple types of stories facing street, stories under the roof, et cetera. And so the proposal is basically to move to the standard grading measurement of finished construction grade, which would then sort of enable and allow the simplification of a bunch of other things that we use, and would just help us bring us more in line with the ways that these measures are being measured in our peer communities. And it's just a bit more standard with also construction industry. So so I can just break right there and take any questions.
Makes sense.
Yeah, makes sense.
Some,
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
well, sometimes, a construction company will cast the basement at the grade level
Mhm.
and then landscape all around it. So now they're like 8 feet above ground, above grade level
Mhm.
to the construction. And I wonder whether can be managed somehow. Let's say I've got a lot, and if I can build my house 10 feet above grade, I would have a fantastic view, but if I don't.
Mhm.
So managing that difference between grade and finished construction, I think we need to think about.
Yeah, so we did think about that as, and asked a few builders about what they thought about that, possibility. And there are already a number of sort of legal and practical things that would limit that. And taken together, they would limit that to a pretty low possibility, we think, would be a real outlier situation. The
Well-
first and most important one is that we have a
Nick?
limit on the amount of fill that can be moved during construction. The second would be would be that areas where that is most likely to be happening would be areas like the scenic view, areas that are already covered by some kind of elevation-based height limit that would preclude them abusing a statistic that is tied to the ground to push their overall height, house height above. So that would exist that protection already exists in the most sort of height sensitive areas of the city, at least according to the logic of our own regulations. And
Where do we have that we can't?
the
put up
scenic
with
protection
the-
district, yeah,
It
establishes.
says that you can't add too much to.
There's
existing grade.
a maximum elevation above sea level.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay.
And nothing can violate that, no matter where it starts from. So that already protects the most sensitive areas, like height and view sensitive areas in the city. And then also the cost of construction and the practicalities of doing that sort of thing on most sites would put a, like, no pun intended, downward pressure on the that sort of on heights. Achieved via that kind of method.
We had an example of the model house that was built at Spear Meadows.
Mhm.
There was an argument about the fact that it was higher than it should be. And that house was built quite high
Mhm.
and landscaped around,
Mhm.
way above grade.
Mhm.
And it seems it sticks out like a bit of a sore thumb. All the other houses in Spear Meadows are more or less at grade,
Mhm.
street level more or less. And then you go along Kimball Avenue and have a look what they've done.
Mhm.
They've basically done what mountaintop miners do. They chopped off the top of the mountain. I mean, have you been down there? Anybody been down there?
I drive by, yeah.
I mean, it's a disaster.
There's a big pile of dirt.
It's huge holes in the ground. They've
Well, a
cut
lot
down
of
the
stuff
forest.
around, yeah.
I mean, they've changed the topography completely. So I don't know whether that's controllable, but there's no way that you'll ever find what was the original grade because it's gone.
Mhm.
And it's been filled up with boulders and crushed stone and who knows what. I have a couple of what do you call pictures from a few years ago and now.
Well,
And
I'm not,
I don't
what's,
know what
what's the
they've
issue?
done.
What's
don't-
the issue?
Well, how will we ever control, manage what they're gonna build there?
But doesn't this say it's the street level is the?
So, okay, so we have a couple different, yeah, we have a couple options for, yeah, I wanna expand a little bit on the grade proposal. So the bulk of the proposal to adjust grade calculations would be to take instances where we require pre-construction grade and allow the use of finished construction grade. So that's after some grading has occurred to for the purposes of siting a building in a particular location to accommodate its intended height, whatever that may be. That is also, again, just wanna emphasize, finished construction grade or some by various definitions, it varies a little bit between municipalities, is the de facto standard amongst other municipalities. So that's one main policies or technical suggestion. The other one would, small technical detail would be to expand the use of the measurement of taking excuse me, the technical term for it is escaping me, but basically what we do in the form-based code where we require that we align the grade for construction for new buildings, the finished grade to the adjacent street. So currently, we don't require that or even allow it in a number of scenarios where arguably it could be allowed. So those would be certain subdivisions, certain infill areas that don't have wildly varying topography. There's a lot more in the city where we could be using this, and it's already shown success here in the form-based code area, which again is relatively flat. But expanding that could would do a number of things, but one of the things that it could do, Michael, is address what you're talking about, which would be to allow people to have a it would allow a closer relationship between the street, which may be created for the purposes of subdivision, and the house itself.
Now, don't get me wrong, I like the idea of going to finished grade,
Yeah,
because it simplifies it a lot. And I'm always for simplifying things.
yeah,
But it's just how to manage it.
yeah, definitely. So we also do have a certain, we do have protections around the amount of landscaping and earth disturbance that can be done as part of construction. So, that's something that I do wanna take a second look at and just verify that those are in line with what are typically allowed.
Well, that seems good,
Yeah.
for when you come back with finished language, just these are the spots where we're controlling this, cause I think that Michael's got a point, like, we don't want somebody to go and dig a big hole and make a big mound and then, create
on
this
top of it,
weird
yeah.
situation.
Mhm.
Mick, you may have covered this already, I apologize for having to step up for a second,
yeah.
but I think a key thing that you relayed to me in terms of how conceptually to be looking at this is today we sort of conflate where the ground level is being set with how tall the building is. And you were describing to me how if we can be clear about this is your ground level, and today's conversation being part of that, and then building height is measured from that set point that you've established. It makes it a lot simpler to calculate each and not to sort of have to be going. I think the
Exactly.
designers, the feedback you got is that you adjust this number, you have to go back, you adjust
That's
this number, you have
exactly
to go back. So
Yeah.
set a number and then say whatever the appropriate height above that is, now you've got a building plate to work from, so.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, exactly. And then, that approach is generally the typical approach. It does require, at least a review to make sure that we have appropriate backstops so that, the height above the grade is well defined and people understand what they are expected to do for compliance. Same with below the grade or at the grade. We want to make sure that, we want to review to make sure that, this wouldn't lead to too much earth being moved, et cetera. But the overall idea is to disaggregate these two standards and these two processes, because it turns out, talking to, folks in the construction industry, that, we look at this as just two different measurements on a diagram and two different lines of code in our LDRs, but they're looking at this as two different processes that might happen at different times of the year by two different contractors. And so trying to design for all of that at the very outset, when there still might be tweaks to building design or location based on things that come up, it is very difficult and it's very costly in the overall expenditure of time.
But the builder will set the finished grade. And then he's got a baseline from which he's gonna build.
Yes, which gets reviewed as part of the review of the whole project. I mean, if they've set the grade in some crazy way.
I mean, I could, you know, you build a development on a slope, like the on the right side of
Yeah, it's a big slope.
Kennedy. The houses are built on a slope, but there's a street that can be the reference. You need a couple of streets.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, I'd like to explore using the street reference wherever possible. I think I need to do a little bit more research to see how, if there, I'm not aware of a place that uses that as like the primary way to measure, except a place that's like primarily form-based code, or a lot of it is form-based code like Winooski or something like that. So I'm not myself aware of exactly a place that uses the street grade as the primary and sort of default way of establishing a grade prior to building construction or as part of building construction. I'm interested in seeing how broadly it can be applied because it is an easy shorthand and it does apply very well towards infill and subdivision and form-based code projects alike. But, you know, I don't want to overprescribe it and I want to make sure that we are giving a broad range, like an appropriate range of options.
Right, because I mean, where you have slope is the place where it's not gonna apply as much. And
Right.
I'm just sitting here thinking of all the earth sheltered houses and
Yeah.
earth sheltered buildings that are going up. Like in some parts of the country, in particular where you do have slope and where there's a lot of climate issues. You
Yeah.
know, it's just like, I have a feeling in 50 years, we're gonna see a lot of earth sheltered buildings.
We may, you know, steep slope regulations also apply to a lot of the things that might be regulated by, that, you know, it would also be regulated by building, geometry standards. So, you know, there are some sort of built-in limitations to where even, you know, a building might even feasibly be allowed, and changing these really wouldn't change that much, if at all.
Anyone here? Duncan or? Hey, we have some audience. Ryan?
Yeah, I guess a comment question, with the finished grade and street grade. When I look at the stuff on Market Street, like Blissby in particular, it's just kind of uncomfortable the way it's just a little bit higher than the sidewalk. And so now there's like an extra ramp coming out that, like, you know, then you've got a little ramp with a little lip that needs a railing that then goes to a door that has actually, you know, a table in front of it blocking it, because you don't have to have all of your doors open and accessible. And it having that protrusion instead of having the building actually be at the appropriate level of the sidewalk, it's such a small difference, but to me that's an impactful difference of the way that public space and the interface with the building can be used. And I'm wondering about both that in terms of a grade solution and how that can be regulated. Also in terms of you roll that stairs and ramps play external to a building versus internal to a building, or, you know, into the facade versus out of the facade. And where those combinations are for this committee. I know that's a different day's discussion. But we are fortunate to have fairly level ground in a lot of areas, but it's not completely level. And when I look at some stuff in Winooski, I just think, God, I don't want to see that built again because of the way they've bungled that.
You might have some flooding issues at some point. I mean, you know.
Yeah.
When I visited Venice, they have steps up and then they have these little contraptions that you fit in the door that go up this high to keep water out of the ground floor home or business. I mean, they're sort of cool. They really work, I guess.
Floodgates, yeah.
Yeah,
Some
but
places in Vermont have them too. They're, on a dry day, they're not installed, but they're
right,
in the closet, ready.
yeah. And so, I mean, I think we have to be cognizant of that, so everything can't
Yeah,
Yeah.
be without a need for a ramp or something.
Yeah, at the same time, I don't wanna be, no, I think that all does make a lot of sense, and, you know, thanks for looking into all this, Nick, there's a lot of good research in there. I think one potential thing, I guess, I don't wanna be too prescriptive about, as you said, about looks like flooding and what elevation you're at, cause I mean, as an example, like, it's not street view, but that out at 510 Shelburne Road that just went up. It's a couple feet above grade as far as I can tell, it's looking at it.
sure.
And as best I can tell, the reason for that is it vastly simplifies your stormwater drainage.
Mhm.
Cause it all drains in the sort of center of the lot in the back. And it's only like a foot or two above, but I do a little bit of stormwater draining in South Buck. If it had been at the exact level, the way that water is sloped, they would have had to like put the bioswale like next to the door where the accessible parking is or something. And that would have created its own sort of whole host of access issues, so
Which building is that?
it's the one that just went in on next to Walgreens on Shelburne Road.
Oh.
It is a couple feet above the, I was like, I don't know, I haven't taken a measuring tape, you sort of knows there's a little bit of a ramp over Shelburne Road, but. And I definitely hear Ryan's point that it's ideal to not have that, certainly, but that's a case I can think of where if we had forced them to be exactly the site level, it would have essentially, I don't know how we would have stormwater for that building.
Yeah,
Without a
yeah.
lot of extra money.
Yeah, so I think I again, I will take these in reverse order, because there actually is a logic to that. I think, so the next part of this project would be to figure out exactly how prescriptive we need to get. I think having, you know, if the commission agrees that this is generally the direction you'd like us to keep moving, then the next steps would be to call some of the same folks we talked to, maybe a few others as well, perhaps Ryan, the folks who designed that building you mentioned, and talk to them about, okay, so like what do we need to be considering when we are, you know, putting in detailed regulations for how to build out buildings according to like on a finished grade. So we're moving to this new standard. What else do we need to be thinking about? What are some common design elements? You know, what I want to talk to a few of them, like how do you, like, what do you design? You know, what exactly are the elements that you are designing for? And so the idea would be to then use that information to establish, you know, like minimums and maximum story heights, you know, and any other, whatever they might be, attendant regulations that ensure that we aren't setting ourselves up for future flooding or other kind of, you know, preventable issue, like, you know, perceivable issue. For instance, also, you know, access and street interface at the sidewalk level. So, yeah.
You had a few questions
Yeah,
for us, and I think item one we've probably covered already, and I hope you've picked up on all of them. The question three about medium scale neighborhood.
yeah,
and
yeah,
The answer, I think the answer is yes.
okay.
I absolutely agree with that, and I guess maybe a question I have, I guess, for everyone, including Nick and the council is. So, yeah, bringing medium scale, like kind of like those mid-size height limits for the kind of the mid-size multifamilies up, I like that idea a lot. What would be the appetite to go perhaps a step further and differentiating something like putting a higher height limit on duplex, triplex, and fourplex compared to single family? Essentially, the idea that we don't want to have huge mega mansion single families, but you know, if it's like a duplex or triplex, maybe it is okay if it's a few feet taller. I'm not talking about, you know, put 4-story fourplex in, you know, a low density neighborhood or something, but like maybe like, you know, like 40-foot or something, you know, and maybe bump it a few feet and perhaps like, yeah, like the table currently, basically it's pretty flat, and then it jumps up for large, and Nick suggested bringing the kind of medium scale stuff up a little bit too. I'm saying maybe go one step further and also bring the kind of duplex, 2 to 4 unit level, just a little bit of the single family. I'm curious what people think about that.
Yeah, I mean, again, Montreal has great examples of, you know, you walk in, there's a ground floor unit. Now, I don't like some of the steep steps that they have
Oh,
there.
come on. What about the spiral ones?
No,
They're not really fun to carry a couch up, let me tell you.
They do this in the
In the
winter.
winter with a little
This
bit
is
of
crazy.
ice.
Yeah, you know, like there's ways to do that where you can definitely have 3-story, you know, 3 stories and even 4 stories they have there. And I mean, it's something that we don't see. I don't know if we'll ever see it because I don't know how you get builders to build townhouses like that are multiple units stacked. You know, stacked duplex is basically what it is. And I don't know why it doesn't happen here, because it seems to be a very common thing in other cities. Even in newer cities, you find things like this, and if for some, I don't know why it doesn't happen here, but you need the height, you need that extra height. The other thing that I wanted to comment on, because I know that we've always had this limitation on accessory dwelling units of 1 story, and I'm like, that makes no sense, because, and I've talked with people who have these big McMansions, and I said, well, you know, maybe someday one of your kids wants to live here. You literally could cut your house, you know, put a wall in the middle and have 2 houses. But of course, you know, we don't allow an ADU to be 2 stories, so that would be a little tough. So there's no reason to not have a 2-story
There's also the
ADU.
challenge of, our regulations today, if you're doing an accessory structure, wouldn't allow you, other than in the form-based code, to do a apartment over a garage, which is a fairly common way of doing an ADU, and
They don't let you do that? Cause it's
they
all,
is us, but
because
correct,
it would 2 stories?
cause that would be over the 15 feet cap.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
so.
we have
I think
to,
that falls into what you brought up in the announcements, like, I
Yeah.
think we need to, you know, when we get there, maybe future project, do like a look back and say,
Let's look at the
what are the
ADUs separately.
barriers that we're seeing to
Right.
getting an accessory, to having a front?
Yeah, make them
you
more
know.
attractive to more people and not just a
Like,
1-story
yeah,
little.
like,
kick
I
out.
grew up in a house like that, big house, put a few doors in place, and then my grandparents had half and we had half, and we stuck a new kitchen in 1 half, so.
Mhm.
Right.
I definitely agree. I know my parents are currently in the process, or they're looking into doing exactly that, the garage with an ADU on top or something. In their case, they're like, oh, we need a new garage anyways, and I don't know, maybe so we already have like a live-in care or something there, you like do that, you know, and they're pretty stoked about that. And yeah, I would love to be able to build that, and it would be nice, I'd agree, to do that here too.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I've been watching exactly that kind of ADU go up on Shunpike Road. Not the one that goes all the way through, the one that goes between Kimball and Williston Road.
Oh, right.
They've built a beautiful ADU attached to the 2 garages and apartments above, 2 stories.
Is that in Williston or Southern?
I think that's in
I
Williston.
don't know if it's in Williston,
Williston?
yeah,
Yeah, it is.
and it's very attractive.
Before we lose the thread on it, Colin and Michael had both suggested that in those medium scale buildings, which are allowed in the medium scale neighborhood, those 5 to 12 plexes, that looking at that additional story, as Nick had suggested, you were both supportive of that. Is that something that you'd like to see drafted?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think once there's stuff in the table, it'll be really good, I mean, the table just had a lot of
And then,
stuff crossed out.
The second idea that Colin had was to explore whether there would be any benefit to allowing a little bit more height for the sort of 2, 3, 4 plexes. Is that something that you all would like to have Nick do some homework and research on and talk to some builders about whether that would be consequential, and if so, what it would take to be consequential? Are we talking about 5 or 8 feet, or are we talking about 15 feet or 20 feet, in which case, is that something you'd like to
scale.
spend a little time with?
Yeah,
Yes,
that's the
scale.
scale is important. I like that idea.
And also allow for a sloped roof, you know, because so much of what we see, you know, they're proposing these buildings, but to meet the time, to get that extra story in, they're putting a flat roof
And
on
that
it.
was
And I'm
one of
like,
the-
we don't want to encourage
That was one of the the reasons to start this project is what we've seen and what we've heard from a number of folks is buildings are really getting squished by the feet numbers, and the way that they're achieving it is by making the roof flatter and flatter and flatter, which doesn't gain you much, but it gains a half foot, which might be, what makes the difference for them, and so you sort of get these buildings that are starting to do this, and
Which
we've
isn't
gotten
ideal in this
not great
climate.
feedback on that.
Yeah, it's not ideal in this climate to have,
Right.
flatter roofs.
Yeah.
Yeah, pitched roofs can be, we wanna definitely allow people to build out pitched roofs for a variety of reasons.
Is
definitely.
there
So-
anything else today that you needed feedback on?
I don't think necessarily feedback, let me just take a quick look at the memo here. Yeah, I think that's, very clear feedback on the middle section. I did want to address the ADU thing, just to say, one of my initial recommendations that I am making now is that we explore adding height to accessory units to allow, specifically to allow for the addition of ADUs above garages. That is a pretty specific scenario, but it's also one that I think we all know is somewhat just kind of common and generic. I just heard of some folks asking about maybe hinting a bit of a broader look at encouraging ADUs. Would you be comfortable with just limiting this project, any work on accessory dwelling heights to just be for that sort of somewhat narrow goal of allowing for ADU appropriate height above garages, or is that something?
No, let's fix
Yeah,
it for
yeah, you
everything.
can fix that
Fix
first,
it.
and then we can go back and,
You decide what fits in your project. We gave you like 30 different topics.
Okay, sounds
The
good.
ADU.
We'll start with the ADU stuff and see if that covers enough,
Yeah.
and then if we need to, we'll take it from there. Okay, yeah.
Don't ask us. Yeah, go on.
I do have one question. You were mentioning that you're, going to move the total stories to get rid of this confusion. I'm like within roof line
Yeah.
stories and basement stories, and you mentioned that potentially the total stories may be lower once we kind of all the dust settles as a result. I guess my question is, this sounds very weird when I say that, I guess why is,
Oh,
'cause
yeah,
I
no,
guess for me, when I
yeah.
sort of think about it, is when I hear people objecting to like, oh, I don't want big buildings.
Mhm.
I feel like the main objection is to, I don't want a big tall building.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not, I don't want, so like, I mean, if someone manages to find a way to put a 4-story building with 28 within 28 feet or whatever, and it's the same height as the next
Yeah,
door's
yeah.
2-story building because they're created with, I don't know, some garden level junk. I'm not, should we be banning that?
Well,
or-
the answer is actually, it's purely mathematical. It's really about labeling, not about, and calculating, not about like a policy decision about how much height
Okay.
to allow. It's that in the changes that I'm suggesting is that we would just expand the category of what's a half story and and allow some certain half stories or certain building elements, let's say, a very like steep pitched roof with only a certain amount of livable, with only a small amount of livable space underneath it. Or a walkout basement that is largely bounded by that it basically has no usable light, basically only from one side or something like that. The proposal is to lump more of those kind of design elements under the half-story category, calculate them as such, 0.5. And then, and that would just naturally lead, and these are things that are currently
I
being
see.
counted as full
Okay.
stories, but sort of with caveats, like story under the
Okay.
the roof or something
Okay,
like
thanks for
that.
clarifying.
Yeah,
Makes a lot of
exactly.
sense.
So it's basically just reclassifying, which leads to an overall sort of lower number required of stories for each. It's just a reclassification, and sort of like yeah, it's just like changing the value that we would be assigning to each. Like the height value, the story value, we would assign to some of these design elements. What that requires then is making some distinction between, let's say, let's say, thinking about like a 1.5 story single family home where you have some amount of livable space under the pitched roof. Maybe there's a dormer, maybe there's like something along a gable. It would require distinguishing between that and the upper story of, let's say, a townhouse that has a mansard roof, but which, if you're inside of it, is functionally a full top story. So it's gonna require, you know, writing in some kind of distinction between the two of those, and also distinguishing between what's, you know, a walkout basement for a house that is built right into a hill, and what's something that someone kind of built into a berm and then got, you know, so to address your original point, Michael, that kind of goes back to the mounding issue. We don't wanna make it so that someone could make a sort of a false walkout basement, call it an extra story, or a half story, and basically get a free half story. So yeah, so this is some of the further refining of the regulations that I was referring to that I'm planning on doing in the coming weeks.
You're always talking about ADUs now. What are you talking about? Others.
I think he's just talking overall.
Oh, just
I think if we're gonna look at the ADUs and allow an extra story, then the whole ADU thing has to be redone. And it's not something that we can do now, I don't think.
I think there's an appetite definitely to revisit this in more depth. So,
Yeah.
because this residential and so.
Probably
Just like it may or may not fit into this project.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I-
doing that now.
do we, can we move on to the RPC stuff, or still on height stuff?
I want one closing
Okay,
comment.
Go for it.
I guess it's one thing I'm just thinking on all this thing, and this is perhaps out of the scope of this, is it with stories, one thing we haven't talked about is that if I read this correctly, there's a regulation that basically says you can't build more than one story above all adjacent houses in low density residential. And that that includes like if you're on one side of the street and diagonally across the other side of the street view, that is included adjacent. My understanding of this is that as a result, because we have a ton of like ranch homes in a lot of the low density residential neighborhoods, a ton of the lots in the city are already not really bounded that much by our stories requirement or even height requirement. A lot of them are essentially bounded by, oh, there's a ranch next to you, you just can't build 3 stories no matter what. And maybe this isn't time to do this now, but it does seem that with all this work we're doing on bumping up height limits and maybe tweaking around stories to give people more flexibility, I suspect that if we don't find some way, I understand the appeal of having some rule that takes into account adjacent properties, so you don't have like huge scale discrepancies, but some way of softening that rule in a way that's sort of amenable to people in town might be need to actually unlock the ability to use these changes in a lot of parcels throughout the city.
Does that exist in South Burlington? that
Yeah,
rule?
so there's the requirement in place today is that, as Colin said, within the low scale neighborhoods, you cannot be more than 1 story taller than I think it's the tallest adjacent
I think it's any adjacent.
or any adjacent building on an adjacent lot within 150 feet.
Yes.
So I think that's a good idea to take a look at and see what kind of limitations that placing. You know, it either could be eliminated or it could be made 2 stories different.
Yeah,
That's
something
sort of
like
an
that,
acknowledgement that.
Yeah, it's a very good catch, Colin, thank you.
Height difference, like the house that's behind us is like close to our house, but it's up a hill, so it's already looming, even though it's not necessarily.
So if yours was quite a bit taller, it
Yeah.
wouldn't feel like it's living
Yeah,
over.
so maybe there's like
And you could look into your
some
rooms
kind
more
of
easily.
number.
Yeah.
Okay. Kate, you're given, I think you're on. I'm gonna stand for a minute. Just to
Oh,
help me.
certainly, thanks. It's spreading out.
Feel free to stretch. So I haven't sat this long in like
Do you,
3 months. I'm okay. I just need to
Jessica,
like,
given that we had 3
stretch
people
a
who were just in
second.
a meeting right before this and you're stretching, do you wanna invite a 5-minute break for people, or do you wanna keep pushing?
Break,
or
break.
you guys feel-
Free to stand up
Get a drink.
if you need a
Yeah,
stretch.
stand up.
I've got
I'm
some
okay to
beers
just
outside.
stand.
outside and across the street, just to be clear.
We'll do a 1-minute break. Michael's leaving the room.
I'm always,
Jessica,
you probably notice how I'm always like doing this with
Oh,
my
I'm
feet
always
anyway. 'Cause
fiddling around too.
Jessica,
My physical therapist was
Break.
just,
Like a 7th inning stretch.
Seventh inning stretch, that means we're in the seventh inning.
Jessica,
Thanks for reminding me.
the reason I'm not there tonight is because of
you're what?
my hip is the
Oh,
reason I'm,
no.
So far.
well, it's been going, I have bursitis in my right hip. I had a cortisone shot yesterday, so,
Oh, well, hopefully it's gonna feel better. after
yeah, but for a week or so, it doesn't feel very good, or a few days anyway. Yeah.
that.
It's actually a pretty simple, it's a very
Uh-huh.
simple step.
Boy, you've had a hard
So
time,
I'm
with it,
like,
huh?
"Oh, no, dude, it's
I
okay."
had
And
a
I'm
hard
like,
time
"Well,
of it.
Unless you
I-
can't. hear
I
good, You can do this.
21
And I know
broken
people
bones.
do cannot hear really.
What?
Yeah, you have a hard-
21 broken bones. I've
No
had.
kidding,
Like,
wow.
Now just big fingers crossed. on it, but-
How many
Yeah,
incidents?
yeah.
13
But,
incidents.
so I will get back to you with the positive. I just have.
You have,
My
like,
mom,
We got back.
they're actually diagnosing me with a osteoporosis based on the number of bone
Yeah, there
breaks.
was a
My
bunch
Yeah.
bone is actually not that bad.
I'm like, how do you respond to these?
So
And I'm like, you
the
just
bone
click
doctor
on
is actually
You
fighting.
click on the
fingers
invite,
right now
you just
about,
click
like,
on it, and then it takes you to the
getting
next step, and
osteoporosis medicine.
if you
so, like,
erase it, it.
I showed him my table of
away.
bone breaks
think
and,
that's
and he was like, okay,
They kind of clicked out.
I'm kind of at the osteo.
So I had to
No, I
send it,
still have.
I sent it over
Level.
again,
Yeah.
just because.
And-
Oh,
yeah.
Or you just kind of really,
Yeah,
like,
it's
whatever
so-
you there is like,
I know.
that sounds awesome.
It's like skiing, hiking, Mount Washington, Iceland, skateboarding, roller skating, you know, it's like.
Like, point there, it's like,
big
these
debate.
are all 1-story houses, these are all 3-story buildings directly next to it.
Yeah, but that's okay, cause that's not, I don't think
Really
this,
hungry.
these parcels aren't what.
Well,
Right.
it was.
So my point is, you basically, all this
That extra
area,
meeting.
Right, you can't do
don't
it.
Oh,
be
yeah, I should
anywhere
do
in
that.
there. Cause it's
Oh.
all this in residential,
I
and
walk
there's
around
just,
the neighborhood
half
like
these things
leaning
all
on
branches.
trees and
Yeah,
stretching.
too. But like, this whole neighborhood is
I get
basically.
so stiff.
So.
Am I
you
like,
have a
like, you
cat?
couldn't build that here?
No
even though
cats.
there's
The day after my injury, they
May-
rooted me back
Maybe,
together.
it gets, there's some weird disclaimers if you're on the boundary.
So it's.
You will get, it's a complicated, I would say, I think if you're adjacent to
There's the vertical
high
bow,
scale
and then there's the ball.
mixed use,
the
I think it's
between-
exempt, I don't know about that one, so it's got some weird edge cases, so I don't know the exact details. All I know is if you're a part of this area, you can't.
I'll get him on
It's,
that.
It's in there, I just,
so luckily I didn't have.
I'll
to
bug you later,
move.
Paul.
Okay.
And that's why I can move around. Right, I can, didn't take the cast. Yeah.
That's sort of cool. So will that, when you go through a device to get on
I
a
think
plane?
so, my shin doesn't, I have a titanium shin in that same leg and it
Oh.
doesn't. That's all. Okay, we're all back. Let's go RPC,
Sure, well.
right? Or
Yeah,
somebody,
so I'm gonna do the quick lead and then I'll introduce Kate. So quickly in your memo tonight, there are 3 related but slightly separate topics for you all. One is any additional feedback that you might have on the regional future land use map. Kate can speak to that. And we have all the maps up on the screen if you want them. One is about a recommendation to council about tier 1B, and we can talk about that in a little more detail. And then the third is the introduction of the housing targets. So we kind of laid it all out in there. Kate, if you have anything sort of preliminarily you wanted to say, go for it. This is Kate McCarthy. She was here a couple of months ago, back in January with Taylor Newton. For anybody who wasn't at that meeting, Kate is one of the newer staff members at the RPC, but is a seasoned veteran of Vermont planning, having worked with BNRC previously and the Vermont Community Foundation and the Wyndham Regional Commission before that. So we're really excited to have her with us.
Paul, could Kate come up and sit next to Colin, then we could,
Would that be easier?
Then they could
Yeah.
see.
Sure.
can see you,
Oh, I was gonna like zoom in really closely to her, but I guess we can,
okay.
that's
I
a
haven't
joke.
been able to see either Helen or
Yeah.
Kelsey for the entire meeting.
Yeah,
It's intentional.
Yeah.
You need
I
to
can
move,
move this thing
We
around.
can see you.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure, yeah. You need to move the tables closer together or something, you know?
Thank you. All right, well, thanks, Paul. Thank you for the introduction. It's nice to be back. We had a good conversation in January, learning about Act 181, taking a glance at the draft future land use map, and since then, a couple of things have happened. One of the most notable is that we've released that map to the public. You may have seen on CCRPC's website that there's now an interactive map. It incorporates the feedback that we got from you after our first visit, and it's now available to the public to look at until May 19th. We're already getting a few comments, but not a avalanche of comments. We encourage you to take a look, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, and that public process, that is one part of our public process. I've also had the chance to come to 2 events in South Burlington to do outreach. I went to the Rec Department Community Dinner, as well as to one of the library concert series events on Saturday a few weeks ago. So got to talk with some people that way, and I'm continuing to look at ways to reach folks who often don't participate in these processes. So the map is out there. We're continuing to gather feedback, and this touch point with us, with you here tonight, is an opportunity to ask if you thought of anything else since January, if you've had a chance to look at the map, if you have additional feedback or questions about the draft future land use map. And this isn't your last opportunity to share that, but this is a touch point. I'd be happy to answer any questions or take some notes if you have thoughts.
I mean, be boring to start off. I reviewed it, looks really nice to me, it looks pretty well thought out. I mean, yeah, oh, I like it, put it that way.
Thank you, Coach.
Well, I thought we had a good meeting about it last time. Went over it pretty thoroughly, and I thought it was good too.
I would agree.
Any other comments or thoughts? I guess one thing that I wasn't at the meeting, I missed it, but I think what's really neat about this is kind of seeing the context. Like so often, like we're very much thinking about like our zoning and our land use, and I really liked kind of seeing this in the context of, and the same color coding, and you know, just being able to kind of see across the borders, because that's how we live, especially here in our city. I feel like there's so much blending at the edges that I thought that was good.
Thank you. I'm glad that was interesting. And I think that I really appreciate that remark, because being able to zoom up, zoom out, think about how we're interconnected, and then kind of plan accordingly, whether it's for housing or transportation or jobs or natural resource protection, is a really important conversation to be able to have. So that's been an interesting part for us, bringing this map out to the public as well.
Any, Duncan, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, I was not at the meeting in January, but I just had a question, maybe more so for Paul, about the packet. There's 2 maps there, Tier 1 eligible areas in SB, and then eligible areas residential enabled zoning districts. I'm just wondering if you can just give me real quick, what's the difference between the 2?
I will cover that in just a minute.
Okay, all right.
So that's the next part of the conversation about
all
Act
right.
250 and what your recommendation to council could be. So this is first step map, second stage using the map.
All right.
I do have one question. We have one orange area in the whole city, which maybe makes sense, but it feels a little funny that one neighborhood that's already so far from
Oh, right.
everything
Club
gets a
Estates, right?
different
Isn't that what
color.
that is?
It feels kind of mean.
I don't, it feels funny, doesn't it?
It feels a little funny, and I guess I just wonder if they need to be transitioned, because they're kind of a neighborhood also.
Orange.
That's something that we
It's on the other side
have
of the
scratched our
airport.
head over,
Yeah.
north of the
Club
airport.
Estates.
Can you see it there?
Yeah, it's, Country Club Estates.
Yeah, perhaps I will use what transition actually means.
Sure, so I'll start there. So orange on the map represents a transition area, and this is, thank you, Paul. or whomever is bringing that up. Transition areas are a category, one of the 11 categories that were defined in statute. And what this indicates is an area that may have some commercial development, it may be low density, there may be underutilized parcels, or there may be some residential. But it's an area that could merit further planning that doesn't really fit into one of the other categories that we have that could become more with additional planning or investment. And so the orange transition designation brings focus to an area. So why did we put it here? This neighborhood has some of the same form as a lot of the other areas that are planned growth areas. It has sewer and water. What it lacks is connectivity. Which doesn't mean it isn't a nice place to live. It could be a perfectly nice neighborhood, but it doesn't quite meet the criteria for being connected or having the potential to be connected to a center or a core. So we really, that one was a dilemma. And I think you're right to notice that we really scratched our heads over this. It felt like it would be a stretch to call it a planned growth area.
Just as an equivalent, I was zooming around as you were looking at this. There's a couple in Shelburne and one that notably jumped off the page that is similarly disconnected, although also a lovely place to be, is the senior housing, Wake Robin, which is sort of, it's a beautiful spot and it is not connected to anything around it.
So that's what that orange is, yeah.
It's an interesting, the idea of the transition is with future focus, it can identify what it should be in the future and how it should transition. I think what's tricky here is it's also built out.
What's tricky is the what?
Is that it is also built out.
Yeah.
When we've done things like bike ped planning, it is the hardest area to think about how do we connect this, or what's a park that serves that, because it's disconnected.
Our orange spot, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's Mountain View Drive and all that.
Well, they do have a funny little park, though. Doesn't it have a tennis court or something that is fallen into disrepair?
Yeah, on the front edge, I think that.
The front
bigger
edge where you
parcel.
see the,
Oh, yeah.
Duncan HOA community.
I don't think there's any businesses in there though, cause I think I've gone door to door in there.
I don't know.
But
I think the
It's a nice neighborhood.
Yeah.
it is a nice neighborhood.
But you're,
I mean,
okay,
some of those-
I'm not opposed to keeping it orange. I'm
know,
feeling
I think
better
the-
about it.
Yeah, the connectivity argument.
The one other thing I would note is that the RPCs, the regional planning commissions under the statute were given some of these challenging circumstances of sort of intentionally in statute, disconnected places are supposed to try to aspire to do something else. And there's sometimes it's uncomfortable, but that's how the statute sort of intentionally laid out to sort of present to the communities the challenge of drawing attention to the area.
Do we, I guess if we're saying that, what about that spot that you have to drive across the railroad tracks, then you're at the lake and it's kind of down in the industrial area?
Holmes Road. Holmes Road or Holmes, yeah.
That feels a little bit like a outlying, disconnected other side of the tracks, but
Yeah,
quite
they
nice.
sort of like it that way, but.
No, isn't that whole
So there's
Allenwood
two,
estate possibly getting redeveloped as well?
there's two different roads. There's this one is home. And then this one is another one and they don't actually connect there.
There's a little
Bartlett
creek
Bay, yeah.
there.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I have an issue with this area, but this area also feels like a little bit disconnected from services and parks and also built out, but like limited
Well, Queen
access.
City Park is kind of, I mean, they have a beautiful park, but they've got a one-lane road.
Yeah, maybe this isn't
Right.
as bad.
I think it is, it's shades of the same issue. I think the
Yeah.
difference is, from my perspective, that Holmes is maybe a half mile, which is for the homes, which is not an inconsequential distance, but but we're talking about, 3 times that distance
okay.
or 4 times that distance. Even going to Williston, here to get, you're all the way over here before you get to anything to the car wash, which is,
Not that
closest.
great either.
Yeah, no, and it's.
and then the other
you're-
direction to get to anything that's neighborhood, you're basically all the way up at St. Mike's. It's 3 or 4 times the
Long
distance.
bus ride.
I have no change, just thought we should touch
Yeah.
on it. Great. Anything else on the map?
I sort of didn't like
Yes.
the infill word too, because that made me think that I don't know where you would infill in this, but I guess that was the designation. It's in transition and or infill, which are two rather different things, are they not?
Infill can be used to facilitate transition, but there are other ways for places to transition other than infill. So
Um,
maybe that's a little with,
Yeah.
yeah.
Paul Engels
Oh, go
was
ahead,
just
Paul.
trying to go.
Yeah, the big problem with that neighborhood is that anything outside of the neighborhood is floodplain, and it's absolutely literally floodplain. I mean, I've been there, and other
Yeah.
than the neighborhood, when there's a flood, it's water everywhere, so it's, it's by nature isolated.
That's evident on 3 sides, one by the river, and then there's the wetlands
And then the military on the other
on the
north
airport.
side, yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So we could run a bike path across the runway,
The
or
runway.
use the runway.
Cautionary tale. Are we on to the
Leave it.
next one?
Yep. So the next conversation is using the map. So one of the ways that Act 181 lays out this new regional future land use map is that enables communities to and the regional planning commission to make permanent essentially a number of the current temporary Act 250 exemptions. So Duncan, to your question, that is where these side-by-side maps come in. So I'm actually gonna show a slightly different slide first, and then I will show this to you. I was able to make a slightly better side-by-side. So coming up on the screen here for you, is 2 maps side by side showing what the current Act 250 interim exemption geography is, and then what is eligible for Tier 1B. So the interim exemptions, there's a number of them, but they're basically areas within a quarter mile of transit service. They are centers, and they're the neighborhood development areas essentially. They each provide slightly different exemptions, but basically they're 50 to 75 dwelling units in a new project are exempt from going through Act 250. The Tier 1B, so these all sunset in 2027.
Is that the blue?
The blue is the transit ones, and then the other is this purple and the pink are different versions of them.
Okay.
And don't spend too much time looking at Heinsberg Road on there because it is a statewide mapping, and then you're supposed to call the district commission for specifics. So don't spend too much time looking at individual parcels covered by that.
Okay, thank you.
Under the legislation, there are 2 tiers of future Act 250 eligibility. The one that we're talking about tonight is Tier 1B. In Tier 1B, centers and areas planned for growth, municipalities can essentially request to the Regional Planning Commission that then request to the State Board to have new projects of 50 or fewer homes on 10 or fewer acres continue to be exempt from Act 250. The map on the right is showing what that geography is. The next slide that I'm about to show you is what it actually is sort of practically. Because some of the areas on the left-hand side are our commercial industrial districts that don't allow housing. So while it is technically eligible, there's no housing in there. So that's why it's a little bit narrower here.
It
And then, of
only
course,
applies to housing.
It only applies to housing in Tier 1B. And this does not account for some parcels of more than 10 acres. And none of this overwrites our local zoning, most importantly. So if our local zoning calls something a habitat block, and that's not represented in here, As always, they need to meet our regulations and anything else. So, staff's recommendation, is to, recommend to council that the areas that are eligible for tier 1B, that the city council request that of the RPC.
Okay,
You want
any,
somebody to read the motion?
but, sure, let's make the motion.
I move to recommend to the city council that they seek tier 1B status for all eligible areas within the urban center, village center, and planned growth area of the regional, of the regional future land use map.
Okay, any second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Or about the maps or questions?
On the map on the right.
Yep.
The white area is where there's housing's not allowed anyway,
It is either where houses are not allowed anyway,
or it's.
or
outside.
there are rural areas in the regional future land use map which are not eligible for
Yep.
tier 1B status.
Got it.
Any other questions, discussion from anyone? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that was unanimous. That was unanimous, so we don't need the roll call.
Okay.
Great.
So the third part of the conversation tonight is to introduce the newly provided housing targets. So that was in your packet as well. There's a lot of information in the table that's there. Kate can do some background, but I wanted to draw your attention to at least all the conversations that staff has been a part of. For the urban communities, we're really talking about the middle target. There's a very wide range from a relatively low number to a very high number. That was what was provided by the state to the RPCs. The Chittenden County RPC pretty quickly on said, you know, one represents sort of region-wide business as usual, with all the disparities that exist town to town. One represents sort of, if every housing issue were solved over the next 25 years, and the middle sort of represents a reasonable stretch to take a significant chunk out of the affordability crisis, essentially. Is that a fair description,
I
Kate?
think that's a fair description. Yeah.
So no action required of you, but wanted to give you the opportunity to chat about it. Kate, if you wanted to talk about anything else in there, go for it.
I had some questions,
Relative-
just in terms of the numbers.
Sure.
So is South Burlington our target is quite a bit bigger than anyone else's. Burlington's kind of close. So is part of that reason because of our proximity to work? Cause I look at some of the other communities, like, I don't know, Milton, I mean, you can get there, it doesn't take that long, and it's an interstate, and they have a whole hell of a lot of land
Mhm.
that's probably, developable.
Mhm.
And then I look at South Burlington, unless we get a whole bunch of the 14 level buildings, I find that a hard number to reach without saying, well, we really don't need any open space, because we have the southeast quadrant, and let's just fill the crap out of it, and then we can meet the demand. And that kind of runs counter to, I think, a lot of the city's, I don't know, goals and policies and values. So tell me how we got to that number,
Sure,
please.
sure. A fascinating process, one we started before we had the numbers, because we really wanted to be able to think kind of absent any big numbers, what the process should be. And where we landed working with our planning advisory committee, which is made up of planning directors and planning commissioners across the region, was to have 3 different categories of communities: cities, rural towns, and suburban towns. And as one of the things, so the 4 cities together have about 50% of our housing stock currently. The target places 60% of the housing stock 20 odd years from now in those places. And our thinking was that those are some of the places that are best planned, that can manage density, that have the infrastructure to accommodate it, and that, as Paul has pointed out before, they're kind of growing many of these places are growing at this rate anyway, and it doesn't represent a huge departure. So to get back to your original point in question, when you sort of look at Milton compared to South Burlington, you see some similarities in terms of proximity, opportunity for development.
Economic development too.
Economic
I mean,
development
they
too.
have a lot of
Yeah, and having more, when you have
Economic park.
local
yeah.
economic development, people can live closer to their jobs if they're houses. And so the biggest difference between Milton and South Burlington is the presence of infrastructure. So that's something that we took into account when we were sorting communities into these different buckets. Milton ended up in the suburban category. So the way that we're going to be allocating the housing target for the suburban communities is we take they're taking about 36% of the regional housing target, and then we divvy it up across the suburban communities based on the future land use map and the areas planned for growth that are mapped. So it's linked closely, the land area is linked closely to the map, the future land use map and areas planned for growth for the suburban communities. For the cities, a much greater percentage of the land is already sewered and watered, and able to accommodate the housing development. I'll pause there. In case anyone wants to add a
So-
follow on.
So just to follow up, that would really, to meet that 7,500 new homes. And when you think about where we still can develop, that it seems as if the city would really need to push for the multi-level housing,
Dense.
I think
the dense housing,
I
the,
think it is a fair characterization to say that in order to achieve that 7,500 number, we would need to, as you say, push the development community to think for some of the larger scale.
uh-huh.
Where I would disagree with the statement you said a minute ago is we don't see this having to reverse any of the work that you have done in things like habitat blocks and NRP, that is not pushing into those areas. You have already enabled along Shelburne Road substantial height in city center, in small scale infill in neighborhoods. We've sort of sliced and diced these a number of different ways looking at this number. If we were calculated in the same way that the mixed urban and rural or suburban communities are, we would still be able to fall in that rubric of not, this does not intended to say development should go in the areas that we said development should not be taking place. Or must not be taking place.
Where's the 7,500 come from? That's existing.
The 7,500
That's the
is
goal.
the target,
That's
Where's
the
the
target.
25 years.
The target's 31,000.
Yeah, so the what I'm
Yeah, yeah.
showing is this handout. I want everyone else to know what we're looking at. Oh, you got it right there.
Yeah.
So the regional,
reviewed it.
the mid-range target for the region-wide, 31,595.
Yep.
And then we took the 4 cities and we took 60% of that 31,000. And I can't do that math quickly. But then we divided it up between the 4 cities based on the land area, and Burlington, Winooski, Essex Junction, and South Burlington. So you'll see South Burlington has a fairly high number rather, of units, in part because of the land area available.
The land area that's available for development.
Yes.
As designated by us, so if the area is served by water and sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who gets to decide which target is low, mid, or high?
We're encouraged, it's ultimately up to the towns. What we're gonna be asking the towns to do and cities, is to put this in their municipal plans and demonstrate through policies, actions, investments, other implementation, the steps that you're taking toward helping achieve the target.
Because
We're gonna be encouraging everybody to put in the mid target into their plans for a couple reasons. One, the low target is kind of status quo and actually doesn't solve our workforce problems or affordability or begin to address homelessness. We start to address those things, make you know, needed housing for workforce, for changing demographics and everything else, once we
that-
get to the mid kind.
Yeah, that mid-level, it's about 300 odd houses average
Yeah, and then the
per
right,
year.
that's right, 303. And in the rightmost columns, the 4 rightmost columns, you can see today's growth rate and how that compares to the others. Paul has pointed out in version 2 of this, we'll have to adjust the annual historic growth rate. It's actually a little higher in South Burlington, more like 170, I think, per units per year.
Below,
So what it's
303 in the mid-range.
Yeah.
What Kate's saying is that it's said that our historic over the last 25 is 142 in there, it's actually 175. That's a little
Okay.
error in there.
I've been busy.
You have
Um,
been busy, and that's been one of the things that's been pretty exciting to me, working with South Burlington, and I've worked statewide in really small towns, and now in larger ones as well, and to see the amount of work that you've already done to contemplate housing, to say, yes, if, yes, housing, if it goes in the right places, with the right design, and uses our infrastructure efficiently, and yes, if we are careful about those parts of our community that we want to protect and keep available for everyone to use. So you're very far along in doing a lot of thoughtful work about how housing can happen in a way that's compatible. So I think that's pretty exciting.
And the piece that we don't have quite as much control over is transit.
Okay.
And, meeting these goals, it just seems like at the same time, we should have been planning before this on how to really develop an effective transit system, because developing high density, it goes along with developing the capacity to move people without private vehicles.
So it's a
And
chicken and egg. Do you
it's
do the
very much
density first and
it-
then it's transit?
Well,
It's a slow
I mean,
process.
I'd like to see the transit planning, cause all we hear
Happen.
about is how, well, they're taking away the bus lines and, there's not enough ridership and everything and, I mean, having just come from Montreal, I mean, we did for the first time, we parked in Brossard and took the
Tram.
REM tram well, it wasn't running on the weekends, but that was a good thing, cause we probably wouldn't be able to park there. Because by the time we left on Monday before noon, there was no parking at that REM station. None.
I'm really glad you brought the transit subject up, because I think this is a really good case study, of exactly sort of what this, at least in my head, can do. So this past summer, we worked with Green Mountain Transit and the school district and the town of Shelburne and a little bit the town of Williston to do how could we re-envision and improve our transit service? And really at the core of it was, where are we seeing change in our community that could make transit viable, i.e. city center here, Shelburne Road,
Williston Road.
and connecting the two together, which has long been a goal of ours.
Right.
And our big analysis and pitch is, for transit to be viable, we need to be building resiliency and sort of a web rather than a hub and spoke system.
Plus,
And this helps focus everybody's attention to say, our policy goals are to be this, therefore transit, you need to catch up.
yes, and plus, what really encouraged us to park in Brossard and take public transit in was the fact that it is really, really hard to park in Montreal. Really hard.
You pay through the nose.
You pay through the nose, you have to, you're gonna walk further.
So it's driving downtown there too.
Where you're gonna pay some valet parking thing, just an extraordinary amount of money to park down there, and I don't think we've begun to address that. And also, I think the planner that was from, or the development planner who was from Austin, I don't know if it was in Austin, but there's a residential community that's getting a lot of attention because they provide no parking
Yep.
inside the neighborhood. It's all very peripheral to the, and it's just like, when are we gonna be able to make that happen, where people feel like, I don't have to have a car right next to my front door? Cause it sure makes it a lot easier and cheaper to develop if you don't have to have on-site parking.
Con and then Duncan?
Yeah, I think one comment, I was just doing some, napkin math real quick, and honestly, that 7,000 number seems, while it looks big and scary at first, it honestly seems pretty reasonable, just given how much space we have for infill. Like, I mean, so I just, look, I mean, the city center, like the form-based code area is 175 acres. If that entire thing is 20 units per acre, which you can achieve at like 4 stories, not that hard. That's 3,500 units right there. And we're talking going way over 4, and we have all of Shelburne Road to build out. Like, I think we could hit this without even touching the Southeast Quadrant. Like, I think it's hard to truly see, like, cause we have so much, we have so many big, huge undeveloped land things that I think it's honestly like, I'm more curious how Burlington's gonna hit 7,000 because they have so much more space than we do. But I think frankly, even though we have a higher percentage growth than Burlington, I think that's honestly, I feel like that's gonna be easier for us to hit than that.
To your point, the area of city center that's been recently built, including to Ryan's points from prior meetings, all the stormwater areas, which is a lot in this area, is about 25 units an acre, just as built here. So if you go to, say, the U-Mall property, their stormwater is all underground and they're pre-existing, so their responsibility is gonna be a little bit less. There's a lot of potential in there. We did run some numbers around, what would future average density be? And I'm happy to just show a little slide on that for you.
Yeah, let's do it. And then we'll get to Duncan. We look at the slide first.
And Paul
And then
wants to say
Paul.
something.
So I have a few different slides, but this one on the left here is showing the average density across the area, the centers and the areas planned for growth. The blue lines represent in the various towns what the current is. South Burlington is this one here. To the left of it is Essex Junction, Burlington. The tall one is Winooski. Then you get Williston, Essex, Shelburne, and I picked Heinsberg. And then the orange represents if the full housing target is met, what does our average density become? And we're still about 2.5, 2 3/4 units an acre on average, with that full 7,500 included, which puts us
Half of Winooski today.
Winooski's only the city center. I mean, Winooski's a hard thing to
But it's only a
compare
residential area.
our whole, yeah.
right. But is this in Winooski also includes all of their single
The
single
neighborhood.
unit homes, yeah. And then on the right is the sort of units added. I also have some other charts, but I know you got some other people who
Yeah.
wanna speak, so.
Well, let's go to Duncan and Paul and then we'll circle back on these other slides.
Yeah, I just had a quick question I'm sorry, is it Kate?
Yes.
Yeah, Kate,
Yeah.
a quick question for you. Was there any weight given to the type of housing? Again, I'm thinking, obviously we have a dearth of new single-family affordable homes. That's something that some towns can probably build more than others based on the type of land they have available. So was there any weight given to that?
Not yet, is the answer. I'm really glad that you asked that question because every community knows, whether it's back of the napkin or from a housing needs assessment, that there are parts of inventory that are not being produced, there are parts of the market that aren't being served. And that's leading to deficits in the community, whether it's for your workforce or for younger families or others that you need and want in your community, older adults who need to downsize. So the answer is not yet. And I say that because we would like, as a next step, to work on taking these targets and dividing them up to get a better sense of unit mix, rental versus ownership, affordability levels. We need to develop a methodology to do that. We hope to work with some of our partners, with our planning advisory committee to figure that out, because that's really the next step. You can say, okay, yeah, sure, 7,000. 7,000 what, where, how? And having the what really helps answer the where and how questions. So we hope to provide that information maybe in the fall.
Within that, just to piggyback, within that 7,000 or the whole shoot match for everything, 17,000?
75383.
No, for the whole county.
31.
31,000. Do we know, or are there, have you set the goals for how much, young professional, affordable homes, low income, subsidized, and then just for people who have good jobs who, can spend more money?
We haven't done that yet,
Cause that seems like that would
Does
be
the housing
really,
needs assessment statewide talk about that
They've
sort of by
done
county
that?
at all yet or not?
Not sure. It
Okay.
may, the previous one did, or a couple back did, especially in terms of older adults and, needing a certain type of units for people over 55.
it seems like it would be important to factor in the cost of land. Like our land is so expensive. So to meet the missing middle,
Mhm.
you might want a small home or even a duplex.
That might not be
That
here.
South Burlington may not be the place.
Or if it is the place, it might be in a particular area of town and it might be a certain height, and then like you said, it might be a duplex or a triplex. So we haven't broken it down yet by
Okay.
county, but I hope that will be our overall, part of our overall project in the fall.
Paul Engels?
Yeah, I want to talk about education. We've had a bond issue for a new high school fail. We have elementary school students that are in modular units outside of the main buildings of the elementary schools. And I know there's a formula for how many new students there'll be for 7,500 units. Do you know that offhand, how many students that'll be?
I don't.
Okay, and so I mean, in planning these things, lots of things need to be planned. We'll need a new high school. We'll need a lot more elementary school space. And so far this city's been reluctant to to pass bonds to approve that.
Yeah. I think that just as transit was raised as something that needs to be planned in parallel, you've raised an important point about infrastructure that needs to be considered in parallel. I'm thankfully, this is kind of a 25-year process. So as the housing grows over that time, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Paul.
No, you didn't. I just had one other point too, and that is that looking at the schedule of building, Shalat is 353 and we have over 7,500. Shalat has a lot of space and I applaud them for conserving a lot of it, but I mean, we're not the town in the county that has all the space. The space is lots of other places besides us.
Mhm.
And we've been
That's
trying to
what-
conserve our space as much as we can. I mean, that's what I've been doing for quite a while now.
I've got to say, this makes me not quite as happy with our blue map of future land use, which I've got to say is not the best acronym.
Or what
The flu
map?
map,
Worst acronym. It's definitely not.
future land use map,
Oh.
I don't know. It feels like we already have high taxes. We already have the highest growth rate, like we've been doing our part. And then to say that we're gonna we're gonna increase the number of units by 76% in only 25 years, it's like, how are we gonna pay for that? Like, if we need new schools, I mean, we're close to doubling, like, our housing units, like, we need twice as many firefighters and twice as many police officers, and
Teachers,
we finally got a library, which I'm excited about. Are we gonna have twice as many people now that, like, I don't know, this feels like, I'm excited about helping solve our housing crisis, but I also, it feels a little unfair,
Mhm.
the way like, the burden of like building a new school, like some of these other communities aren't gonna need to build a new school to achieve this goal. They're not gonna need to have whole new fire stations, they might be able to have a few more staff members, but I mean, the scale that we're talking about is, I'm not saying I'm
Making it
opposed to this, I'm just saying like, this is a really big deal for us to be like, oh, I think we could probably do it, like, yeah, we might be
more than
able to
just
do
houses.
it,
It's more
but
than just
it's,
houses.
this is more than just saying, I like affordable housing, this is saying,
There's nothing about
we need
affordable in here.
to, we need to double our facilities, which, and maybe you have some more slides on this.
Make a comment.
Maybe it's not as
I've
big a
I've got
deal.
a, I've got a thought on that, but
Yeah.
others should speak first, cause you're.
Yeah, I mean, but when you start building like this, you realize how much wealth you're bringing. You're bringing a tremendous amount of wealth at the same time. The other thing that I think people completely forget is we're in the process of figuring out how to restructure schools. I don't know any place else in the world, a town the size of South Burlington has its own school district. It just does not occur anywhere else in the country. It doesn't. Maybe in New England, but they're weird. You know, that's just not the way you do things. Scale helps you. And also, I mean, the fact that there's so many places in the world where a school building is not a standalone thing. It's part of another building. You know, schools do not have to be standalone. So as you're developing all these other things, schools can be part of it. And then also, like right now, you know, we're taking kids from other districts and things like that. This is all gonna be restructured to the point where maybe we'll have several schools that have different focuses. You know, there'll be magnet schools and things like that. People will choose to come to South Burlington from other places because there's a magnet school that has
The
something.
magnet school.
A magnet school is a school
That
that
attracts
has a
you.
certain type of focus or track. It could be arts, it could be sciences,
STEM.
it could be languages, it could
STEM,
be
yeah.
anything. But like, we seem to be stuck in this like old way of thinking here in terms of education facilities. And you know, and I just encourage everybody to kind of look at what's going on in other places because we're kind of really way behind.
I'm not opposed to education change, I'm just saying, in 25 years to double our,
It's a lot.
it's I mean, I love the vision, but like, we have to do it.
Las Vegas County, and I don't encourage anybody to follow that model. But they were building a brand new elementary school every 5 years. A brand new elementary school every 5 years. Now, of course, the way they developed, they just kept, you know, moving further and further out and creating these
Neighborhood of sorts.
Sprawl.
very much sprawl neighborhoods and everything, but they grew very, very quickly and they still had zero taxes. And they don't pay any,
Well, they
You
do
don't
do
have
have
to say no.
gambling.
yeah, they have other ways of getting their money, but it's just like, we just have to like not be so,
Vegas casinos.
not be so
Let's,
limited.
Colin has his hand up
And
and then Michael.
Yeah, I think I kind of want, I mean, echoing really what Don was saying is, I think it's almost kind of, I agree, it's politically at the moment, getting the funding, sort of getting it approved, getting new buildings, and where it's kind of politically difficult, but like, if you're experiencing that kind of growth, we will have the money. Politically, it's gonna be a little hard to convince people of that, but it is there, and I really think of it as exciting that we're gonna get these new facilities. Like, I've lived in central Maine where it's getting population decline. You have everyone in like 100-year-old schoolhouses, they're in terrible condition, and they're like, can we replace it? Like, we're experiencing like GDP drop. We can't replace these. Like, if I think, well, yeah, we get if we're able to, I mean, a new high school, yes, it's gonna be a pain getting there, I agree, but like the end product is, oh, cool, we get a new high school. Like, that is, as Don said, we do a lot of stuff with it, like, I think it's exciting to see this growth. And also, as you were talking about the Economic Development Forum, we are like a pretty young community as far as a lot of the other communities in the area, and this kind of growth attracts people, like, you know, people like me who move in here in their 20s, you move to places that are building new housing, like I'm in a newer apartment building, that's where I'm living, like, and that, you know, helps also even further, you know, grow your kind of tax base and all that kind of stuff. But I do hear like the whole, it is politically difficult to get those bonds passed. I'm aware of that. I mean, I think this all circles back to, I really hope we can see if we can keep revisiting if the state lets do more TIF districts. Cause it does seem like that would be a great use of one perhaps.
Michael's had his hand up.
Yeah,
Is that
go ahead.
okay?
No, the word that Colin used, increase the tax base. Actually, this plan will not increase the tax base, it will increase the taxes
What?
significantly.
I disagree.
It's
Why?
known, it's known as the, what's the list, the grand list myth. You know, people say, oh, you increase the grand list, then you've got more property tax revenue. But it never covers the additional services that were mentioned, like police and fire and roads and schools and all the rest of it. So that's one of the other consequences of this, but not that we shouldn't do it. We should be aware of it. That it will have an impact on property taxes.
Well, certainly if you're building low density, that's true. I
No,
I
yeah.
don't think in higher density.
The higher density, like what we've got around here, it doesn't apply. But when you start getting out a little bit.
But that's what we're doing, we're building high
But
density.
it's population
So
increases.
we want individual companies to build high density.
Yeah.
The city is not gonna
Sure.
build high
We're
density.
facilitating that, yeah.
Right, so
With our
that's
form-based
the
code
other
and all that,
piece
yeah.
of the conversation, and what are there incentives, or how do you really push the development community to build not what they can make a fortune on, and which is really easy, and it's all on a field, but in a place where you go up and it has maybe more cost per square foot.
Paul, Engels?
Just briefly, people who live in apartments do not directly pay property tax. And so most of the building that we're talking about building is residential rental space. So I don't see how that's going to increase our tax base. I agree with Michael that it's the grand list myth that more people pay more taxes, and so there is more money available to build it. That has been refuted. That used to be the old way of looking at things. It's no longer true.
Let me ask a
Okay.
clarification.
Several
An
things
apartment,
depend on density.
yes, several things
Transit
depend on.
depends on density. But keeping property taxes manageable also depends on density.
So before so we don't have any resources to talk about the economics right now, but I do think it's something we need to follow up on. It sounds like, Paul, you maybe have some other slides.
Yep,
with
I
some
just wanted,
information.
so just a couple of last quick points, I know it's late. One, the council is actually, on their work plan, has a discussion of framing out a growth management strategy. So looking at some of these exact questions, they're actually just starting that later this week in a work session that they're doing. So this is helpful to be thoughtful questions about what does positive revenue look like to the city? What are modes of that? So that's one. Two, slightly different from what Helen was saying, but along the same lines. One of the opportunities that I see with this number and this focus in some core areas is I think it's a launching point for communities like ourselves and our peers to really challenge the legislature to say, you assigned Act 181 with the goal of focusing and being thoughtful about where development should be and shouldn't be. Now you need to support the resources to do things like help with schools, knowing that, we've set the target for, I'm gonna pick on Charlotte to not have to build a new school. Now, help us with the resources in the community that you've asked to do it. And I think that is not a magic bullet that happens, but I think it is a focal point. It's a focus point on those kinds of conversations and really pushing the state. The second thing I just want to note super quickly, just in terms of our historic and is just to show this little table here, which is, this is our growth rate over the last 5 decades. So the blue bars represent our growth rate in that decade, so 80s, 90s, 2000s, 2010s, and then 2020s. The yellow bar here represents that, the growth rate anticipated by the housing targets,
That's
By the, by the
three
who?
of-
by the target, by the 7,500 units. So in terms of what we have been doing over the last few decades, it is not magnitudes of, it's not saying, you know, take the rate we've been doing and put propane on it.
So it's the 303 per year. Wow, is that what that yellow, I
Right, it's-
can't
it-
see the scale.
Right, so this is a percentage, so it represents 2.3%. Is the 303 translated into a percentage growth year over year? So
Okay.
just a rate of change question. It's not this is not trying to say absolute isn't a high number, but in terms of a rate of change, this is what this looks like.
Well, I think that is basically what my point is, like, if we are saying ours is the community that's gonna need more infrastructure and more schools and more everything, and these other communities are gonna get to keep their big open areas and not take on those infrastructure projects, 'cause they don't need to, like, how does that translate to here? And I mean, I love the visioning, I love the idea of maybe a school district that covers the whole county and then those resources are shared more appropriately, but it seems like a big part of the discussion. Like, it feels irresponsible for us to just say, sure, we'll double. Chart seems good, we're excited, because I think
Maybe you
there's
can-
other stuff that goes
Maybe you
along
can
with
find
that.
the funding to support
Yeah,
the
right.
work.
Yeah.
Madam Chair,
Yeah,
may I make a motion?
I think Ryan says hand up.
right, let's hear from the audience first.
Hey, this is great. This is exactly what I was hoping to see.
As long as it's.
I'm not shocked by these numbers. I know that a lot of this is because of the latent pushback against growth. And because for decades, a lot of these communities, including this one, have been zoning inappropriately single-family development. The goal of the state is to have concentrated development around services. That is our historic development pattern. What we have in Essex Junction, Williston, and South Burlington, and even further out into Milton, is a new thing that is not sustainable. The kind of development that you can't afford is when you're putting all of those pipes and roads out into the southeast quadrant, as was done for several decades. That is what is the net drain on the tax resources, right? So then people who live there, Michael, like, that is the net drain, and then people like Paul, myself, and Colin,
Okay.
we're paying the high amounts.
It's helpful for you to not call people out.
I don't live there anyway.
It makes everyone,
Uncomfortable?
it makes everyone not wanna listen to you, I guess is what I'd say, cause it's not comfortable.
Okay,
Please don't
sure.
do that.
I don't live there, my friend. I live in a
Right,
55 unit development on Swift Street.
Okay, I'm just saying, we don't need to
Okay.
call out people ever.
Get your facts straight.
Not what I'm referring to, but
Do you stand corrected, sir?
no, that's the property I was referring to.
Ridgewood Estates.
Yeah, and so when we have, to see those numbers makes so much sense. South Burlington wraps halfway around Burlington. So it makes sense that we would be infilling so much more next. And we have designated so much area with infrastructure to be built. The issue is people associate really low density development with anything new. And that was a temporary period of time that was not sustainable. We know is not sustainable. We can't continue to afford to do that. There's been a lot of pushback, but there's also, we have tools now to do better infill. And so these numbers aren't very high. Look at places like Verdun. As like talking about Montreal, Verdun is 4 square miles. It has almost 70,000 people. It has 5 miles of waterfront park, right? It has so much area that is open for the public to be, and yet it achieves a density that is very walkable. And it has transit and it has access. And so those aren't difficult things. I don't know why it's hard to even picture that in this area.
You know, we don't do that anymore. We don't do the sprawl development anymore. And Vidana is part of a 3.5 million population
Only
city.
as of 22 years ago.
I did just want to bring way back to the Donaldson transit planning though, she's talking about how the transit. Speaking as someone I used to work in transport, like in working for a bus agency. And part of why I actually got into this planning commission thing is that basically the number one thing that prevented me from doing my job well at working at transit agency was the density. Like you can't get good transit in low density.
Right.
Honestly, if like difficulties of getting there aside, if the county hits these targets, like really just, you know, again, back of the envelope map, you could probably get all day buses every 15 minutes. Like really nice, just kind of show up and the bus comes in within like, you know, max, you wait, you know, wait like 15 minutes max. The moment it's like 20 minutes peak, 30 off peak, it's kind of hard to fund, but like it's sort of like it's kind of almost exponential, like when your density increases, how effective transit service comes, because it's like we have fewer people coming, you get more ridership, and then you get more, it just sort of cascades, and it's like twice as dense gets you more than twice as frequent transit service in a sustainable fashion. And like I think in a weird sort of way, if you want good transit service in Chittenden County, this plan, I would achieve that. And like, yes, Charlotte has more room, absolutely. If you build out Charlotte, you can't get transit to Charlotte, like that's just never gonna be economically feasible. Transit South Burlington, you know, if it was coming a lot more frequent, I think a lot of people would take it more often, but I don't know, that's but yeah, so I think the point is if we can hit these targets, and I understand that that's a hard thing to do, it's gonna be a lot easier for Green Mountain Transit to increase their bus service a lot, but.
Well, I'm just saying we need to partner with some people.
Agreed.
to Convince them to help us meet the targets with the kind of housing that we envision would protect our, you know, use our infrastructure most effectively, but also maintain the kind of quality of life, the open space, the, you know, parks and bike trails and so forth, that fits with what we want to be. So I think it's probably doable, but we can't, I mean, we can pass this and we can adopt it as a goal, but it's not gonna happen unless developers share that goal and say, well, we'll help make it happen. We will move away from trying to build, you know, another cider mill or something.
We'll never build another side of it.
Yeah, I hope not.
I think I'm appropriate, because Mike Semino actually came to me and he wanted to chat about how to perhaps pick some different projects and kind of get together with contractors and show them what we'd like to build. And I'm thinking,
What we'd
Yeah.
like them to build.
yeah, what
Yeah.
we'd like them to build. And, you know, it's, I think, you know, he was thinking about, you know, projects around here that were not of the kind of density we're talking about here, but, you know, certainly, I think it would be a fun project to do, to put together a series of projects to go to visit that are the kind of density that we're looking at and are nice examples of, you know, low, moderate, and high income that are high density. Because I think you might get more seniors willing to leave their perfectly lovely single-family homes if you had luxury apartments with balconies and, you know, views of Lake Champlain and everything. Because they're not gonna leave for a tight little apartment with no view, even if you can walk to the grocery store, you know, because these folks have money. And they're willing to spend it, but you gotta provide something that they're willing to buy.
You know,
So,
the three people sitting here attended an economic development committee presentation this evening, and the focus was on workforce and housing. And you know, they'll help with this plan a lot. I was gonna make a motion about on the minutes.
Oh, here, let's just, so Paul, could you keep us maybe in the loop on that growth management work? I mean, it seems like a really important
Yep.
piece of this that I feel like we definitely need to be doing if we're gonna.
Yep, and I will relay that, some of this conversation that what I'm gathering is that's pretty integral to these numbers, these.
The success of the
Yep.
numbers, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
This was really very interesting.
Yes, it was. I really appreciate the discussion, and your thoughtfulness and all the planning you've done so far and the questions you're asking about what could be possible for the future. So thank you for being so receptive and curious and, to be continued.
Thanks, Kate.
Yes.
Thank you.
To be continued. Okay, Michael, go ahead.
I move to approve the South Burlington Planning Commission minutes of 25th of March, 2025,
Okay.
as written.
I'll
Uh,
second that.
any discussion? Okay, all in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
It's unanimous, so we don't need the roll call. And I just want to call attention, we did breeze over the schedule and timeline meeting item in the packet.
That is okay.
If
We're meeting
anyone
the
has any
20
questions, let
Yeah,
us know.
right?
29th.
The 29th,
Yeah,
right?
so the next meeting in April will not be the 22nd as it normally would be, it would be the 29th,
following
which
Tuesday.
is the fifth Tuesday in April.
We need to check on anything. Okay, very good. Then we are adjourned. Thank you
Thanks,
so much.
everybody.